So today's discussion will be reacting to हाँ यहाँ पे सब हो गया है यहाँ पे हो गया है nice okay so comment section I won't be able to check too much let me just keep it up on here তোমার স্ট্রিমগুলো রিসেন্টলি বেশ ভালো হচ্ছে nice which also means that up until recently my streams were not nice it's working support you from Chennai thank you and do remember to speak Bengali in Chennai so today's stream is going to be discussing and analyzing what I argue is the greatest single podcast episode in the history of Indian podcasts, and the Indian podcast industry is only like 5 or 6 years old hardly. But even in that short history, this episode is so awesome. Now, full confession, I didn't know who this guy Amit Varma was. I just know he's some sort of journalist, and we'll get to who both these people are. Okay, Amit Varma and Ajay Shah. We'll get to their bios as well. But the first impression I got of Amit Varma was from his interaction with Kushal Mehra. I just checked out that podcast. It's some 4.5 hours long podcast. And there I got the impression that it's okay. It's nice. It's nothing evil. It's not bad. It's not low quality. It's just that it's nothing significant. It's just the shallow top level, superficial level discussions that every first year and second year kid has on an abandoned tank of Presidency College smoking a joint. It was that sort of a discussion. It wasn't anything deep. So I thought, what's the hullabaloo about this guy? Why is he getting views on 4 hour, 5 hour long, 6 hour long, 9 hour long podcasts? So I was judging him based on just that one episode, of course. And then the Libertarian Party of India, the Twitter handle, they had shared this video, okay, the one we are going to discuss today. So I just clicked on it because the headline was interesting. It said, why freedom matters. And it was shared by the Libertarian Party of India. That intrigued me. So then I couldn't understand what's this channel even about. It's called Everything is Everything, and it seems to have mostly economics discussions. Even though Amit Varma seems to be a liberal, or at least, let's say, anti-BJP. Maybe one of those guys who had voted for BJP back in 2014, back when they thought BJP was not going to be a socialist party, etc. So today we find out that BJP is a socialist, hardcore, feminist political party who is not going to give any hopes to pro-free market people, nor to men in general. So the other interesting thing I realized about this podcast, Everything is Everything, that I don't know who is it by. Because Ajay Shah was asking some questions to Amit Varma as if he's the guest, and Amit Varma was asking some questions to Ajay Shah as if he's the guest. Okay, so that was a very interesting dynamic to have. So I still don't know. So let's just get into who these two people are, and then we'll start the discussion. Abir Zain is asking the sad question that Kota. No, it's not a real political party as of now. It's just an idea. It's a germ of an idea. Now let's see if I cast the screen from here. Does the audio come then, or are we going to face more shenanigans? Okay. My face is going to be this little small face. Lol. 24 viewers. All our viewers disappeared because of our StreamYard screw up, okay? We had so many viewers today. Okay. ये तो 720p में देना पड़ेगा, नहीं तो Google Meet को दुख होता है. Okay. And before that, let's just get to who are these people, Amit Varma and Ajay Shah, okay? Amit Varma, journalist. Yeah, so Amit Varma, writer, journalist, podcaster. He started out in a Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, The Observer, and almost every Indian publication. He is a columnist for Times of India, Bloomberg, Quint, Cricket Next. I thought he was a journalist for a while in Rock Street Journal or something. That intrigued me more about him. No, it's not mentioned here at least. Okay. And then we have this other person, Ajay Shah. What a phenomenal discussion this has been. He's a columnist. National Law School of India University, Bengaluru. He's a law professor. Okay. He has a PhD in economics from University of Southern California, Los Angeles. Holy shit. BTech in aeronautical engineering, IIT Bombay. Fuck. Professor of at National Institute for Public Finance and Policy, New Delhi. Consultant at Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, New Delhi, 2001 through 5. Assistant and then Associate Professor of IGIDR Bombay, President Center for Monitoring Indian Economy Bombay, Consultant of Rand Corporation Santa Monica. Santa Monica in California, by the way, is the place where Hans Zimmer is based. He has his main studio in Santa Monica, California. Publications in Service of the Republic, The Art and Science of Economic Policy, Penguin. And another book is called India's Financial Markets, An Insider's Guide to How the Markets Work. Nice. Cool bios. Let's start the interview now. Or the podcast. Jesus seems like Amit Varma is a leftist journalist from his credentials, but never heard of him. Amit Varma himself is a staunch feminist. Right. Great. Yahi hai zindagi.
People may make their peace with conditions of unfreedom. Okay, so we humans are survivors. We will survive in a concentration camp. But when that individual agency is taken away, then the dynamism is lost. People stop thinking, people stop creating. The culture, the arts, the science, the business, all these things go into a dull despondence. And what you need for a poor country like India is the opposite of that. What we need is an effervescence of optimism, of creativity, of invention, of people starting a business, of people coming up with a new business model. And freedom lies at the heart of all these things.
Welcome to Everything is Everything. I'm sitting here with my good friend Ajay Shah. I'm Amit, as you know, and in the background there is a young cat which is mewing, and I needed to clarify that because it sounds like the wailing of all the dispossessed and the hungry and the starving through these many, many years of India's tormented journey. But that journey is fine now, right? We gained political independence in 47. We had the reforms in 91. Ajay, is everything well with the world now?
There was a freedom movement that got us to the ejection of colonial rule in 47. But it's striking that actually, in many ways, freedom did not come to the people in the period after 1947. So there is something very disappointing that we were supposed to have played a freedom movement. And actually, we ended up with
we gained freedom from England and then became a colony of Soviet Union.
Freedom in many respects.
I couldn't agree more. And there's a book here, right here, Freedom at Midnight by Lapierre and Collins. And circa 2008, I went to the New India Foundation with a proposal for a book I wanted to write called Freedom After Midnight, where the point that I was going to make through the book is that all we got in 47 was political freedom. We didn't get personal freedom, social freedoms, economic freedoms. And I never ended up writing that book because I'm a lazy bum, and they rejected my proposal, but I should have written it anyway, but I didn't. But the point there is that I've used that phrase, India's second freedom struggle, again and again, and I couldn't agree more with you. And I know we are both agreed on, the fundamental quality of the word freedom itself.
So Amit, tell us, what are your big ideas on understanding India's journey? What has happened to us? And I always think of the interrelated pieces of freedom, the state capability, the capability of the private sector, and then the outcome that is prosperity. How do these pieces work?
Okay, so someone is saying that Amit Varma also welcomed Mohammad Zubair and considers him a proponent. So you see, we are stuck between a rock and a hard place. तो यहाँ पे भालू दौड़ के आ रहा है हमको मारने के लिए, यहाँ से शेर रेडी है मारने के लिए. तो so I'm guessing then Amit Varma is just the standard Indian libertarian who has no clue about anything in India other than just the economic affairs. So libertarians have this idea in India that Mohammad Zubair is a great journalist, he's doing the fighting the good fight, etc. But they seem to just ignore those facts, or maybe are ignorant of the facts, like how many people he has set the dogs after, how many people he has hounded and stuff, allegedly. So that's too much for my libertarian stomach to swallow, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately.
So I want to get into the weeds with you later, and I'm looking to get a lot of illumination from you on this. So much of this episode is going to be about India's journey towards freedom, where we've taken a few baby steps forwards, we've taken a few baby steps backwards, and we'll talk about that journey. But before that, as a whole, I want to talk about the importance of freedom to me and the way I like to reframe it, because freedom is such a misused word, and there are so many ways in which it can be interpreted and used. I like to think in terms of consent, but in many ways you can, you can use it interchangeably with freedom. And this is a book I am planning to write seriously at some point, where I'm asking myself sort of two questions, right? And one question is, how should I live in this world? And the other question is, how should the state relate to society? How should we all relate to each other? And most people would think these questions are in different domains. One is a question of personal ethics, and the other is a question of political philosophy. But to me, the answer is the same. The answer is consent. That consent is everything, and coercion is the ultimate evil. And you can use freedom interchangeably as a word for this. And
Now, the facts that you all said about Amit Varma now puts this entire conversation in a different light. It shouldn't, but now I'm affected by it, unfortunately. You all should not have given me those facts. I should have remained in that ignorant bliss. Now, everything he says about freedom and let's say coercion and consent, etc., is going to be challenged by the fact that he's a feminist and he thinks Mohammad Zubair is a journalist worth having on a podcast.
one level you can get at it deontologically, as the philosophers would say, but I don't want to use jargon, but you can come at it as a first principle and say consent is good for its own sake. If individual autonomy is to matter, if our lives are to have meaning, then consent matters, and therefore you can go all the way back to John Locke and his right to self-ownership and how we arrive at all our rights through that. But I find that that is one way to make the point about why freedom is important, but I think you can arrive at it from another direction, where you can talk about how freedom is always consequentially good, where you can go to consequentialism and say that freedom has the best outcome for society, freedom has the best outcome for individuals. And obviously within all of this there is what I call the grand liberal paradox, that to enjoy our rights we need a state to take care of those rights, and the existence of the state means we are giving away some of those rights. The state has a monopoly on violence, it takes taxes and blah blah blah. So leave that aside for the moment. But the value of freedom in our lives, I think, is often understated because of the fundamental reason that we think of the world as a fixed pie. And we intuitively, perhaps because our brains evolved in times where we lived in small tribes, in times of scarcity, but intuitively we think of the world in a zero-sum way. If I am to get richer, you must get poorer. If I am to get something, I must take it from you. But the world is not like that. And there is a brilliant chart and a series of charts that illustrates this, which you'll see on the screen now. This is by Angus Madison, and it is a chart of world GDP growth through history. And suddenly, around the time 1800, you see global GDP growth just absolutely shoot up. Right? And why is that happening? That's happening because of the Industrial Revolution, which is...
Now, Buddhadev Bhattacharya has asked a fantastic question here. And since I'm naive and I have no idea of the repercussions of what I say today, 30 years later, I will answer it. Stay in the call. Okay. So yeah, Avinav, I came from OBS and Google Meet. Okay. The problem was with StreamYard then. So, a fantastic question by Buddhadev. He's asking, I can't cast the question on the screen here because I'm not using StreamYard. So he's asking, if you had to choose between anti-Hindu libertarian and Hindu socialist, which way would you sway? I would choose an anti-Hindu libertarian because the end result of a libertarian society, libertarian policies, is that I still get to go about being prosperous, rich, and as Hindu as I want to be in my personal life without harming anyone. A Hindu socialist state is that I get the right of being Hindu, and that's the only right I get, and I'm poor as fuck. So, unfortunately, anti-Hindu libertarians. And no matter how wrong they are on things, they are still right on economics, and that more often than not makes up for everything else. For example, let's say India becomes a hellhole of anti-Hindu libertarians, okay? What's the worst case scenario? You still get a good education. Maybe your parents have secretly somehow managed to keep you Hindu. You leave the country where there is a bit less amounts of anti-Hindu libertarians, and you send money to Hindu causes here. And libertarians still are in favor of investments and stuff. That's how you manipulate public opinion and stuff. But whatever the markets say, that's where the libertarian society will sway towards. So if the market says sway further towards Hindu values, Hindu symbols and stuff, Hindutva related books and stuff, the way it is doing today, in that case, anti-Hindu libertarians, the anti-Hindu-ness aspect of anti-Hindu libertarians is inconsequential. So anti-Hindu libertarians over Hindutva socialists any day.
Globalization that ensures, which is enabling voluntary transactions. And I've spoken in an earlier episode where we spoke about Bastiat and Hayek and had so much fun. I've spoken about the double thank you moment. This is John Stossel's formulation. The double thank you moment is, if you are, say, selling coffee at a coffee shop and I'm a customer, when I hand you the money, I say thank you. When you hand me the coffee, you say thank you. Both of us benefited from the transaction.
There is a science and engineering view that the Industrial Revolution came to the UK because they got to Newton, who was born in 1642, and the steam engine, which was 17.
Two comments here, very well said. One by Amit Varma, one by Abhay Agarwal. Abhay is saying that Hindu society can game a society which might be anti-Hindu, like it is now in general, but if it is libertarian. Very well said, very well pointed out, and I agree 100%. The other point that Amit Varma made here, that the idea that commies and socialists always have, that it's a zero-sum game. If you are becoming rich, it means I'm becoming poorer. मेरा पैसा खाके हम सब का $4 billion खाके कोई billionaire का net worth बन रहा है $4 billion. Okay, those kinds of idiotic things. And yes, that's very idiotic, and no one should believe those stuff. It's better to believe in ghosts.
That the Industrial Revolution came to the UK because they got to Newton, who was born in 1642, and the steam engine, which was 1776, and the motive force is attributed to science and engineering. How would you respond to that? Because there are parts of the world, in China and other countries, where there are people who are willing to make the bargain that we should take the package of modern science and technology, but apart from that, we can just be as thuggish as we like.
I think science and technology enabled all of this. It enabled globalization. It enabled us to trade. For example, through science and technology, you got the railways. But through railways, you had the tremendous trade. But the point I was getting at is that every voluntary transaction leaves both people better off. And therefore, the more voluntary transactions there are, the more the wealth of the world goes up. And look at the chart again, Angus Madison's chart. That's exactly what you see happening. This is the overall wealth of the world.
Exchange of services, products. It's such a good thing. It builds so much self-confidence, swabhiman, etc. Why wouldn't you want a world like that?
World going up, which tells you it's not a zero-sum world. It's almost as if by magic that the wealth of the world is a particular way. You and I exchange things and suddenly we are both better off. To me, that's magical, and that's a magic of trade. That's a magic of voluntary action. Now look at these other charts right here, which shows that happening to, in a country-wise kind of breakup. In fact, if you look at the third chart right here, what you'll see here is, you see China, Deng takes over. Sure, no freedom, all of that.
By the way, guys, look at China's most significant jump, okay? It happens 92 onwards, and here onwards it's 2001-2, when they allegedly sign an MOU with some people, allegedly.
We've argued about it in a previous episode, but market-friendly, allowing voluntary transactions among the people without granting political freedom and all of that. But still, look at the chart. Look at India's growth since 92, and as you'll elaborate later, since 1977 in a certain way. It's a very complicated story. We'll get into the weeds later. But my broader point is that if you look at these charts again, what you'll see is that economic freedom correlates to prosperity, and that is a big freaking deal. Like, just to take an example, our mutual friend Nitin Pai likes to give a stat that he likes to give, that is, after we liberalized in 91, every 1% growth in GDP meant that 3 million people came out of poverty. He earlier used to say 2 million, now he's revised his assumptions to 3 million. That's a staggering humanitarian good. And obviously, there are many things flawed with GDP, there are many nuances there, but broadly, that's a staggering humanitarian humanitarian good that we brought 300, 400 million people out of poverty after the 91 reforms. And again, there are nuances. One could argue that the course for that was laid earlier, and we can talk about that. But throughout the world, this has been the case. So much so that one can almost understand Francis Fukuyama asking the question when the Soviet Union collapsed, is this the end of history? And there was a question mark to that. And by end of history, he didn't mean end as in it is over, but end as in the end and means kind of end. That is this the aim of history, that we live in liberal democracies and we are all prosperous and successful? And obviously, the world is complicated, and history continued down its merry way. But
Now, great comments coming here, and I would like to respond to them. Someone asked that Nayan asked that, but anti-Hindu libertarian would lead to a decline of culture, right? Now, remember that it's not an ideal situation. The choice I was given was between Hindutva socialists and anti-Hindu libertarians. In that case, I would have to choose an anti-Hindu libertarian, because even if you're not prosperous, even your culture can't save you.
Underscoring the value of freedom is really important, because I find that so many, like 70% of India has been born after the Berlin Wall collapsed, right? We have forgotten those lessons. So many young people in the world today were born after that time. They have forgotten the horrors of socialism and communism, and they underestimate the power of freedom and the lessons we should have learned. And some will, of course, point to the welfare economies of this Scandinavia and say, look, wahan pe kitna freedom hai. But you still have a great deal of freedom there when it comes to starting a business, ease of doing business, the way people live their lives. Personal and social freedoms are great. And all of them became rich when they were basically free markets. And once they had brought their standard of living to a certain level, then they could do their welfare statism, and it didn't really matter so much. And that's a point that unfortunately we need to keep underscoring, because again, to repeat, it is not intuitive. There are two counter-intuitive elements here. One is that the world is a positive sum game. It is not a fixed pie. It is not zero sum. And we somehow think of the world, we are wired to think of the world in zero sum ways. And the other point is that
Before he gets to his other point, something Amit Varma mentions here is that, remember that even when India was the biggest GDP, etc., according to Angus Madison, it still wasn't a very good, nice scenario. Did he say it or Ajay Shah said it? Okay. So, I have a problem with that. It's not an issue that India's GDP was not really that much. Because, remember, there's a nice quote that, I don't know whom is it by, but it's just a saying that contrast is the mother of clarity. Okay, everything you declare to be good or bad has to be in comparison to something else. Okay, nothing can be good or bad in abstract. Like Dr. Thomas Well says that if you are saying a particular thing, let's say he's talking about, of course, in the context of USA or in other countries, when they get richer, the commies start complaining that rising income inequality, etc. So, or that America is the worst country in the world in terms of racism and poor being poor, etc. So, okay, worst. But how about name a few countries whom is it worse than? Okay, and are people running from USA to those countries? So, and he calls it the hope for absolute, perfect, abstract, just, free world where there is absolutely no injustice, there's no inequality, everyone is happy, etc. He calls it cosmic justice. So this is that idea of cosmic justice. If you say that, yeah, India's GDP was the highest in the world, but it's not that significant because it was pretty low. Arey bhai, so 5,000 years or 1,000 years from today, people can say the same thing about today's USA as well, and today's India as well, today's China as well. That's absolutely meaningless. All we have to discuss is whether people were coming to India for everything or not, just in the same way that people go to USA for everything today, to get married, to study, to tour, for hospitals, and to seek asylum from other countries, running from other countries, okay, or to make friends, have sex, everything for everything. USA is the go-to destination. Like commies, imagine that for the first time a factory was shut down in West Bengal, and it was called the Tata Shimur factory, right? No other factory ever shut down in the history of West Bengal. In the same way, commies and Congress supporters believe that it's only since 2014 that any Indian at all is leaving India for the United States of America. Before that, nobody left. Vivek Ramaswamy's parents were absolutely white people who bathed so much in the sun that they became dark-skinned Keralian. They ended up looking like dark-skinned Keralians. Now, and someone asked me in our yesterday's live stream, Bengali discussion with Professor Kaushik Gangopadhyay, Professor of Economics at IIM Kozhikode, that he tried to insinuate, he tried to hint, the person who commented, that why are people leaving the country in droves? Why is it the highest today? That's what the data says. Why do you think that is? If you all are saying that, well, there's some amount of capitalism these days and it's better now, why are people leaving? I said that mediocrity is still celebrated in India. Meritocracy is not remotely the priority of most people in India. On the other hand, more people today are well-read enough, qualified enough to provide some sort of service to first world countries. Therefore, more people are getting ready to leave the country. Earlier as well, in the 60s, 70s, etc., 80s, 90s, more people would have loved to leave India for USA. They just fucking couldn't. Today, more people can because of the general upliftment in education and upliftment in people's economic levels, because of which they can access a better quality education, which is giving the chance to leave India to more people. Okay, so these things have gone on forever. Unless we change things for the better in India, people are going to go on leaving, and there's going to be no culture to save if we remain socialist.
That we are also wired to think in this kind of top-down mindset that everything beautiful that exists must be planned and made by someone. You could say religion itself is an example of this delusion. But actually, that's not the case. Economists have this beautiful term, spontaneous order. Languages, economy, societies, natural selection itself does not need a central planner or a designer, and many of them are the products of human action and not human design, as Adam Ferguson would say. So I just wanted to lay out this broad picture, which I know you'll agree with, about the importance of freedom in every domain and how much it means. And of course, even beyond all of this, it means a lot to me at a basic moral level. But even if you are to argue in terms of consequences and we need to see how we can get the greatest good for all, even there I would argue that it's freedom which gives you that, and no matter
Right.
what else you value, freedom is the root.
Exactly. Which is my answer to Buddha Bhattacharya. Now, Suman Awasthi is pointing out that Spotify had to move out of Sweden to grow more, to become this big. And people often don't realize that it's not just the case for companies, guys. The way America's economy functions, okay, I'm going to sound like just a US fanboy who never criticizes America allegedly. Hope you all check out more of our podcasts and live streams. We do. But it is what it is. Most people run away to USA. So I can't tolerate any criticism of USA in that particular context. In the same way as if anyone says that Bangladesh is doing a better job than India in any fucking thing, just show me one Indian who has ran off to Bangladesh leaving India, and I'll shut up, okay? Until that happens, I'm not going to listen to you. But anyway, it's not just companies, okay? It's everything. Music, entertainment. Think of the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It was invented in a way by the Gracie family, fusing bits of the original Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, which allegedly has some connection to India, of course, because Mahabharata has a god called Jujutsu, god of war. So I'm not convinced that it has nothing to do with Jiu-Jitsu in Japan. But anyway, so the Gracie family in Brazil creates something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu by fusing Jiu-Jitsu of Japan, which has now become just karate haya and flying around in the air and fitness, etc., not real combat skills, with some Brazilian martial arts, okay? Now, they sit on it for decades until they realize that unless they go to USA to sell this product, to convince people that this is a nice combat sport to learn, no one ever in the world is going to give a shit, okay? Then they go to South California, SoCal as it is called in short, and today SoCal is the capital of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the whole world, okay? USA, the epitome of white supremacy, there in a state called California, is the home and the capital of something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, okay? So you see why we have to prefer anti-Hindu libertarians over Hindutva socialists. Then Pavel Tatsulin, okay, you can call him the modern father of kettlebells. Okay, remember when we were growing up, there was not much talk of kettlebells. Everyone was all about dumbbells and barbells. Kettlebells had been a popular workout equipment in Russia forever. Pavel Tatsulin goes to USA, makes it popular there, and immediately the entire world starts using kettlebells. Okay, that's how it operates. That's how you create societies which are impactful, where everyone finds success, more or less, unless we are talking about cosmic justice. So it's not just companies and entrepreneurs who benefit out of it. It's all sorts of people who benefit out of USA's economy.
Another way we see this is that people may make their peace with conditions of unfreedom. Okay, so we humans are survivors. We will survive in a concentration camp.
Okay, Darth Vader, come out of your SFI party office. Freedom and democracy is good in an industrialized society, not in India. But you see, we are not an industrialized society because we don't have freedom and democracy. Now you can bring up China, of course. Are you sure their data is not fudged? How many people in the world are running off to China to work or to get a job?
But when that individual agency is taken away, then the dynamism is lost. People stop thinking, people stop creating. The culture, the arts, the science, the business, all these things go into a dull despondence. And what you need for a poor country like India is the opposite of that. What we need is an effervescence of optimism, of creativity, of invention, of people starting a business, of people coming up with a new business model. And freedom lies at the heart of all these things.
So Ajay, I'm going to ask you to, begin our grand narrative of the day of India. Sort of take me through your sense of India through the centuries, as it were, and bring me to independent India, and then we can start talking about that.
Okay, here is a quick summary of many, many books. Okay, so let's start at.
Okay, what was USA's system when they were getting industrialized? Was there a monarchy going on? Or do you mean their democracy was not perfect, fully franchised, etc.?
Really old days, there is a lot of excitement when Angus Madison and others have described India as the largest GDP in some ways at some points in time. But it's important to remember that those were pre-industrial times. So output was agricultural, and India is blessed with good weather, large number of people. And so it looks like the GDP in India was pretty high. It must be clarified that GDP was at abysmal levels. So it was not a great world for anybody anywhere in the world. But in terms of aggregate GDP, India looks good. Okay, it was not a golden age. There were levels of poverty and deprivation and cruelty.
Yeah, there were degrees to what you can call it protectionism. And as for what was the previous comment, that it was not a full democracy. Okay, define full democracy. As I said, there can be degrees to how much compliments you can give to USA's democracy back then. Besides, back then protectionism did not hurt them like protectionism can hurt us today. It's because the rest of the world was decimated and poor as fuck, and also socialist. Today you can't play those stupid shenanigans today.
That were in India, that were out of the world. There was very little political development. There was no rule of law. Okay, so that is the old India. Then under colonial rule, I am transfixed at the explosions that took place in the 1860s and 1870s. Okay, in a very real sense, that is the beginning of modernity in India. And there is a whole bunch of events that came together. The most important was 1869, when the Suez Canal started working and the physical distance between London and Bombay came down dramatically. Earlier, a ship from London would go around the Cape of Good Hope, and once you're going that far, you could even go all the way to Calcutta. After the Suez Canal, it became dramatically shorter. You came out of London, went through the Straits of Gibraltar, went through the Mediterranean, came into the Red Sea, and boom, you are at Bombay. So it was a revolution in India's connectivity into global trade. Also, around that time, there were many, many important technological innovations that came into India for the first time, most notably the telegraph and the railroad. When in the 1860s, the first telegraph connections came to Bombay, and there was a 4-hour delay to get a message from London to Bombay and vice versa, which you will agree is pretty miraculous in that age. So, cotton speculators would be able to talk to each other, and these markets started getting globally integrated. It seems amazing. Then we should look at the institutional infrastructure that makes the modern market economy possible. There was a revolutionary set of developments which took place in the UK. The Companies Act, Contract Act, the Evidence Act, all these pieces came to India. Within just a couple of years after the Companies Act happening in London, it came to Bombay. In 1874, we got the Bombay Stock Exchange. And this entire ferment in Bombay got an explosive moment in the form of the Civil War in the United States, where supplies of cotton from America to the UK were interrupted. And an entire cotton trade was invented in India, where cotton was grown in Gujarat and Maharashtra, and it was shipped through Bombay to London. So this was an explosive moment for the Indian economy. It's hard to emphasize what a break this was as compared with everything that came before. It's like the entire institutional package and the technological capability of the Industrial Revolution was seeded into India all at once. Okay, and in many ways, this journey progressed relatively well till 1913.
So a couple of things here. One is that much as the Indian cotton industry did well because of the American Civil War, in America, there was an explosion in the Midwest when a bunch of factories were set up for making ice. Do you know why?
Well, Shorab is saying that until even 60s, UK, USA didn't have voting rights for women and black people. That's not the case. They had voting rights from late 1800s or early 1920s or something, back when even India didn't have any voting rights really, because it was not a democracy officially. Back then, democracy had a different definition altogether, because democracy was obviously considered some sort of mobocracy. Now, populism is also looked down conveniently only when people you don't like come to power, etc. So I think for those reasons, constitutional republic is a much better idea. But and you are supposed to look after the interests of the state or the province, not really bow down to anything and everything that the people want. But you see, women's suffrage also required some other things. There were many women themselves who were against women's suffrage, because back then voting rights meant you get automatically conscripted in every fucking ward that the king or the prime minister decides for you, for which women refused to get into voting businesses. Okay, it was not inherently an evil thing that was being done.
No?
Okay, the reason for that is that in India there was a huge problem of malaria, and the way to deal with malaria was a substance called quinine, and quinine was given as a precautionary thing. However, quinine could not be had on its own. It was bitter and ugly, so it was put into tonic water, and gin and tonic became a popular cocktail in India. And if you had to have gin and tonic, you needed ice with it. Now this is the 19th century, no fridges. Where will the ice come from? America will make the ice. So the wonders of global capitalism. And on what you were saying, I also want to quote your friend Tirthankar Roy, the great Indian historian. And Vinay Sitapati sent me this essay, and so credit to him for that. But Tirthankar writes at the end of this fabulous essay, which I'll link from the show notes, he writes, "The empire created an open economy, open to trade, capital flows and settlement. For the imperialists, keeping India open to trade, investment and migration served British economic interest. But that does not amount to saying that openness was damaging converging to Indian economic interests. The two interests were broadly compatible until the 1920s and diverged around the time of the Great Depression. But when world trade again recovered from World War II, India had left the stage. In the colonial era, openness contributed to the emergence of a robust industrial capitalism centered in the port cities. It helped the growth of a sophisticated education system. The cosmopolitanism was sustained by the free movement of people, skills, and knowledge. It is certainly possible to criticize individual factors, individual items of factor payment, but economic nationalists fundamentally misread these flows by calling these drain. They were the price India paid to tap into a mobile market for skills and capital. Exactly what you were saying.
Yeah. So I feel that the breathtaking developments which took place in the 1860s and 1870s have not been adequately recognized in India, not least because I feel the nationalists have oversold their case. Okay, so I mean, I do not pine for colonial rule, but we should be cold and clear in understanding history and understanding the events that took place. So this period ran till 1913. So this first modernization of India, which coincides with what internationally is called the first globalization, was roughly 1869 to 1913. Then came a long dark period because of the First World War and the Great Depression and the Second World War, and
which allowed USA to get away with protectionism. So Abhay, it was the 60s where they effectively got the rights, but in theory, in some ways, they could have voted in some contexts from 1874 or sometime onwards. The full easy voting rights, casually voting rights were done in 65, and now though you don't even need a voter ID to vote. That's another matter. So yes, different laws and different things are allowed to be done by different people in different contexts. And for example, universal adult franchise, non-stakeholders, etc. Those things are wrong even today, especially people who are below 25. Why are they supposed to vote? For what exact reason are they getting the right to vote? So you can call India then the perfect democracy, etc. That kind of democracy means absolutely nothing.
Within India, the unrest of the freedom movement and the horrors of partition. So from 1913 to 1947, many things went very badly for India, and it was also a period where the British took many policy decisions that were inimical to the interests of the Indian economy. For example, the restrictions on trade.
No, libertarian Darth Vader, you are absolutely wrong, because you don't understand you're not acknowledging the importance of discourse here. Okay, you and I have grown up where left-wing narratives and discourses have ruled the roost. They have been the normal baseline for every conversation in every circle, in every educated circle, everywhere. If we just change that narrative, everything else of communism and socialism falls apart. All you need to do is convince the people a different thing. So far, they have been convinced of a specific thing. Okay, it doesn't come to anyone naturally, because if socialism came naturally to people, why would every American, like plumber se leke farmer, why would they have a better sense of finance than people up until the 80s kids generations had in educated middle class families? Okay, all they knew of finance, our past generations, were that you must do some savings and put it in a fixed deposit, no matter how much the interest rate and what the fuck the inflation rate is. But American lower class people understood economics better than these educated Indians. How was that possible? That was their discourse, that was their narrative that they pushed, their Heritage Foundation, etc. So many right-wing think tanks and stuff. All we need are those things, and we can convince people, we can absolutely persuade people, explain to people that your socialist shenanigans are hurting you, they are fucking you, and it will come naturally to them to vote in favor of industrialization as well. Check out our live stream of the paper, research paper written by sociologist Dr. Sushmita Das. Today in Bengal, Trinamool supporter se leke CPM supporter, Shingur factory, Shingur farmers who had given their land, who did not give their land, all of them want industrialization today in Bengal. How? There in Shingur, or at least in Bengal, even the left-wing narrative has been beaten by just sheer bloody desperation, like the case was in 1991. So all I'm saying is, if either you get a push and shove from desperation, or you are just taught a different thing in your academia and movies, etc., where poverty is not celebrated 24/7, then you can easily become a pro free market guy. People are fucking gullible nut jobs. You have to just manipulate them in a different way. The way they have been manipulated to be socialists today, you can manipulate them to be libertarians.
And capital flows came as a wartime measure in 1939. Okay, so the loss of freedom began as wartime measures in British rule, and
Yeah.
what has been normalized today. By the way, while I'm on this subject, I just want to take the audiences back to a breathtaking fact. Did you know that before 1914, there were no passports anywhere in the world? Meaning there were no passport requirements. The royalty would write passports to each other asking for preferential treatment for their friends. But for the people, the freedom to travel, the freedom to migrate was just there. It was an inalienable human right. Similarly, there were no capital controls until Adolf Hitler first introduced capital controls in Germany. So the freedoms of that period are breathtaking when compared to the unfreedom that we have all normalized today.
And yeah, exactly. That's what I was about to say. Right? We normalize these lack of unfreedoms, and now we imagine.
What a beautiful sentence. You normalize these lack of unfreedoms. Exactly what M. Shastri is pointing out here, that you couldn't, before 1991, you couldn't even get a bank account without your board exam mark sheet, and the only investment instrument left to you by GOI until 1991, so FDs. So you see, the problem with Indian society is we are going on, at least it's obviously decreasing to a huge amount these days, because of the decreased little hints of free market capitalism that Narendra Modi believes in, thankfully. So we are outsourcing our brains to the government. We are outsourcing our all our intelligence to the babus. Okay, so what happens if you invest? You might lose money. Therefore, let the government take care of me. I don't have to think that hard about it. And therefore, my economics and finance knowledge as a well-educated man in the Indian middle class will be lesser than a truck driver in USA. Because you outsourced your thinking to the babu.
Generic passports are a natural state of the world. Obviously, capital controls will be there, but
Oh, and then let me make this even more spicy. One of the clauses of the Treaty of Versailles was the restoration of passport free travel. Okay, and international conferences were convened all the way into the 60s on how to get back to passport free travel. And the spoiler of that was Soviet Russia, which wanted to imprison its own citizens, which never wanted Russian people to leave because, they would never come back. So Soviet
I
Russia...
want to point something out to Shodav here. He's again saying ANCAP is not good, bro. ANCAP is the final, maximum amount of libertarianism so there's no point bringing that up every time we discuss free markets and libertarianism. But more importantly, you think there is something called conscious capitalism. I don't believe there is. There are no morals. There are no good people and evil people. There are only incentives and disincentives. If you want to incentivize good behavior, do it. That's the only way you can expect good behavior. Otherwise not.
Shah blocked every movement on trying to restore passport free travel, and only now we have the beginning of the restoration of that old freedom in limited ways in the form of the European Union. The European Union is that great development of globalization where the people move freely between France, Germany, and Belgium and UK. Oh, scratch that. Not.
Yeah, good point, Ajju. Concept of citizen is mentioned in the Mahabharata. I don't know about that, but I know that even in Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, I heard that people had to show the foreign traders and stuff. They had to show some sort of seal, some sort of documentation was required. It's not like everyone comes and goes all the time. So he might be talking about some later period, but in ancient times it was there anyway.
Not UK, without passports. That's the restoration of the customary freedoms that we had 100 years ago. Okay, so then we got to that terrible period in India.
very good question again, Abhay. There has to be someone who knows what is good incentive. You see, in a way, the answer is hidden in your question. There can't be someone who is that hypothetical guy who knows what a good incentive is, because we can't really get all 140 crore people to agree upon what is the best incentive, right? What is really good behavior? Because some people will say that unless Adani redistributes all his wealth to poor people until and he has to go on redistributing it until there are no poor people allegedly left in the country, you're not incentivizing good behavior. And I'm not going to say that. So the market has to go on pushing things. People have to look after their own interests, their own financial interests, and their personal interests like culture and history, etc. But the people in academia, think tanks, let's say art and culture, etc., their people have to now start singing a new tune, and we'll have to shame them into doing those things. That's the only way it's going to work. The day they do those things, the narrative becomes a different narrative, and after that everything else will follow.
India's history, where many things went wrong. Okay, and then came freedom in 1947. In terms of the outcomes, per capita GDP growth did pretty well from 1947 to 1962. In my opinion, this has a lot to do with just the reduction of social tension and conflict. We'd just been through the strife of the freedom movement. Remember a Second World War lapping at the eastern edges of India. One minor character, Subhash Chandra Bose, threatening armed conflict in India. And of course, the horrors of partition. So that was not an environment in which people felt safe about their
দেখুন
future.
দাদা বাঙালির ব্যাপারে কিছু বলবে না
Okay,
সুভাষচন্দ্র বোস আমাদের
Okay, fine. So scratch the Subhash Chandra Bose.
See, Amit Varma jokes about Bengalis. Darth Vader, finally, we agree upon some things. Today, at least, I know we've agreed upon countless things over the last 2 years. Darth Vader is saying academia and other cultural spaces are under the control of the left, and BJP has done nothing to free them. Yes, and they're absolutely wrong for doing that. They're absolutely dumb fucks for doing that. They're absolutely assholes for doing that. What more do you want me to say? But we'll have to keep on pushing it with the hopes of either shaming the fuck out of them into doing those things, or this weird fucking hope that some right-wingers all over the world these days have, and some right-wingers even in India have, that there will come a day when academia won't be relevant. And that's the day we will apparently shape discourse through YouTube, bro. So if that happens, well and good. I'm going to be the one who's going to be shaping discourse, bro. And if it isn't the case, keep shaming the fuck out of BJP for not kicking out left-wing views from academia, or at least not getting the right-wing views as well into academia. The moment they put some right-wing people in academia, they are least qualified people, dumb fucks who say colonialism created caste system, etc. And right before the Mughals came, everyone was forever happy. Everyone was giving everyone each other blowjobs. We were all hugging together, singing nice songs, sitting outside a temple. Why do you need to say that? I don't get these things. What does it take away from the brilliance and beauty of Indian philosophy, wisdom, our texts, Arthashastra, or history, or the fucking right to survive today, if we were a society where there existed some conflict, where there existed some evil people, where there existed some criminals who murdered other people? Why the fuck does Arthashastra have so many rules and regulations against crime? Insane punishments against crime. Why, bro? Because everyone was good and nice. Because no one ever fucked with anybody. Because no one was evil. No one ever raped anybody. So, and then the how long is a particular text? That question. Why should it matter to you if the Mahabharata is written like 1 week back versus it's written 20,000 years back? It's still awesome. Learn from it and be proud of it, that it was written by people who were your ancestors. End of story. Now, the moment those dumb fuckers get into academia, they are going to be laughed out the moment BJP goes out of power, or they are going to be laughed out anyway. But more importantly, they are not going to shape or impact discourse anyway. So keep waiting for BJP to feel some shame.
Huh. And that is an environment where private sector confidence was likely to be weak. And so there was a reduction in the growth momentum of that period. And in 1947, when there was that political certainty that there is a Republic of India and the prestige of the Indian constitution of Nehru and Patel and others, it was a glorious generation, and that created confidence, and many people got back to action, and there was decent GDP growth in the period from 47 to 62. It was also a period in which things went very badly in terms of the fundamental strategy of growth. Back to you.
Back to me. So, before I sort of continue the narrative, I also want to point out that I've been chatting with Vinay Sitapati, who wrote a great book on Narasimha Rao and the BJP before Modi. And a point he made where that impressed me a lot is that we should think of the liberalization of 91 as a re-liberalization of 91. His point is that it was Nehru's Fabian socialism and central planning that was a break from the past. You've already pointed out one piece of the puzzle, which is, how Bombay, Calcutta, the port cities were booming under the British as they wired into global trade. The other piece of the puzzle that Vinay cites is from this magnificent book that, many of the Mughal historians I've spoken to on this show adore, which is In the Persianate Age by Richard Eaton.
Yes.
And in that, Eaton talks about how one India's share of the world GDP, as you pointed out, purely by dint of population, was really high at one point in time under them. But at the same time, the decline possibly started because of global trade, because there was so much global trade coming in at the ports, and the power went to the edges where the ports were, and that centralized power kind of began to decline. That's a fascinating narrative. I don't want to talk too much about that yet because I need to, study that a bit more. But let's come back to 47, and when we talk about what went wrong, I want to shift back to a frame that I learnt about from a writer both of us admire, William Easterly. William Easterly wrote this paper in circa 2006 or 2008 for ADB, and I'll quote from that. So in this paper, Easterly says, quote, "Historically, poverty has never been ended by central planners. It is only ended by searchers, both economic and political, who explore solutions by trial and
Also known as seekers. And seekers are what Hindus are supposed to be ideally.
error, have a way to get feedback on the ones that work, and then expand the ones that work, all of this in an unplanned, spontaneous way. Examples of searchers are firms in private markets and democratically accountable politicians." Stop quote. So basically markets and this feedback mechanism and all that.
The beautiful phrase which we always talk about, discovery, not design.
Discovery, not
Meanwhile, we have a growing group of people who are forever insulated from the markets, from any real world realities, any real world impacts, any real world movements.
design. More from Easterly. A planner thinks he already knows the answers. He thinks of poverty as a technical engineering problem that his answers will solve. A searcher admits he doesn't know the answers in advance. He believes that poverty is a complicated tangle of political, social, historical, institutional, and technological factors. A searcher only hopes to find answers to individual problems by trial and error in experimentation. A planner believes outsiders know enough to impose solutions. A searcher believes only insiders have enough knowledge to find solutions, and that most solutions must be homogeneous, and so on and so
M. Shastri, Fabian socialism was a crazy idea, yes, and but Nehru, oh yeah, you said Nehru's FM, yeah, yes, I was about to name him. I thought you blamed Nehru for it, but the blame actually lies with a Bengali man, Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis, a famed mathematician, a philosopher, a biologist for some reason. He used to check out skulls all day long to prove Aryan invasion theory, or based on Aryan invasion theory, he used to do some random shenanigans. And he was basically the man behind all of India's troubles from 1947 to 1991. Now, the other point that M. Shastri made here, that 1955, Nehru launches Avadhi resolution and killed the competent bureaucracy. Policies set in law in 57 through 58 did not kick in until 61. Nehru was dead in 62. The IS can blame. Now, even if he was alive, who the fuck would have cared? People would have touched his feet and said that, yes, real Nehruvad has not been tried yet. But you see, competent bureaucracy was going to go to hell anyway because of the decline of the education system. it was forever declining. I don't think we felt the full brunt of it until 80s, 90s, but it was going down ever since the British left. Unless you are making the point that the things that led to the decline of the Indian education system also started because of that resolution, which I don't think you are making, but I noticed that the education system was going to go to hell anyway because of the socialist nature of the system.
So forth. He's, Easterly's written great books. We'll link all of them from the show notes. But I also want to now, for a moment, shift to what was Nehru's mindset, right? Nehru famously at one point said to J.R.D. Tata, "Do not speak to me of profit. It is a dirty word." He had a distrust of profit. He had a distrust of capitalism. And part of it was understandable. Part of it was that, look, who colonized India? The East India Company, right? It was a...
Yeah, and I have discussed this on my live stream about 1 or 2 years back, that I do have some sympathy for the commies and socialists of 4791, although there were people who recognized even back then that that's not the way to go. Ambedkar, for God's sakes, said that, why do you need to decide for the rest of the future generations that they have to be socialist? Why are you putting a random just one economic way of life, way of looking at economics in the constitution? So, and there was, of course, Rajaji, Sri Raja Gopalachari, the first libertarian in India, or the only libertarian in India, I guess, in the political realm. But more importantly, wait, I forgot what I was going to say. I have a great point. I'll come back to it.
Also, I described a period from 1913 onwards, which were the most important years. If you stood in 1947 and look back, the predominant picture of...
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That I do have some sympathy for the commies and socialists of those days, because they were thinking that British East India Company was a capitalist force. Market, paisa banana, amir. Okay. Those things are bad. That's how we lost our freedom. So let's not do anything related to banias or business. I think that's the reason for the indirect reason for hating Gujaratis and Gujus, Marwadis, etc. in Bengal even. I think it's the same way that racism happened in Africa and North America from the side of white colonizers, which is that they didn't just jump to the conclusion that yes, they are black people and they are brown people and they suck. No, they had a full-blown explanation of it, that they come to colonize and see, they don't have any religious book. If you don't have a religious book, you don't have religion. If you don't have religion, it means you don't connect with God somehow. If you don't connect with God, you don't have a spirit. If you don't have a spirit, you're not even human. On the other hand, you also don't seem to be that white, which means 2 plus 2 is equal to 4 according to them, and therefore non-white people are not humans, and therefore let's start racism. I think that's what happened in West Bengal as well, that okay, capitalism is bad, doing business is bad, thinking about money is bad, and Gujaratis and Marwadis seem to be doing those things, therefore they are bad.
Of the advanced Western economies was pretty grim. They had fought 2 wars, they had had a Great Depression, things hadn't worked so well, and also there was a lot of Soviet propaganda about how the crude mobilization of resources by central planners, okay, things like putting together an Air India, putting together a UPI, these were the kinds of projects which had been done in the Soviet Union, and in the short term they look good because you avoid the messy searching process. Suddenly you mobilize the entire country around a new format of how to use capital and labor.
And you also have to see who his influences are. In our episode on Newton and Gandhi, when we spoke about Gandhi, we looked at his intellectual influences. Who were Nehru's intellectual influences? Now, there's a Time magazine piece of 1951 which says brilliantly, Beatrice and Sidney Webb, the godparents of Fabian socialism, are in a truer sense his creators than Vishnu and Shiva. And the same magazine piece goes on to describe Nehru thus: he shares all the socialist emotional tenets about the capitalist order. In consequence, he has a socialist undisguised contempt for capitalism, reinforced by the aristocratic Brahman's contempt for the Baniya caste. He speaks of the, Nehru's words, Baniya civilization of the capital West, of the West's cutthroat civilization, again Nehru's words. Utterly unlike Gandhi, he admires modern production methods and wants to bring them to India. He has announced that India will in time develop her own atomic energy.
Exactly, Ake Brahma. Yes, I'm glad you've read it. Arnab, which guy, by the way? Me or Amit Varma or Ajay Shah?
program, but as a socialist, he believes that capitalism, after its prodigies of production, is bound to make a bloody and cruel mess of distribution. This view is based on the standard British socialist reading of 19th century economic history. His understanding of 20th century American capitalism is negligible. Stop quote. And another of
and the like why how Abhay pointed out that Amit Varma is going to try to give an apology for Nehru, and to be fair to Nehru, let's admit this amongst ourselves that he was in an impossible situation, right? There was no way anybody could have become the prime minister in 1947 who would not get a lot of criticism today in 2024, right? There was no way anybody in the world could have done a perfect job, maybe except C. Rajagopalachari, because he would not have done too much. He would have let the market take care of it. I don't know if the country would have remained. I have not thought that hard about it. The point just came to my mind right now. But the problem I have with Nehru is that some things he would get wrong anyway, and some things were going to be impossible to take care of anyway. But there are things that we find out almost every day that which were things which were considered wrong and evil by many people around, and even after he realized those were wrong things, he went on doing those things deliberately. He went on forcing things down the throats of Indians which were wrong and disastrous for the entire country. That's I think the room for blame that Nehru has.
of his great influences was Harold Lasky. John Kenneth Galbraith once said the center of Nehru's thinking was Lasky, and Ram Guha once quoted an unnamed wit as saying that at every cabinet meeting there was an empty seat and Harold Lasky sat on it, right? Which is and one can't really blame him. At one level, he was a creature of the times, but at the same time, all the material really existed had he been open to it. He ignored C. Rajgopalachari, Rajaji, a great man who understood the power of freedom that we spoke about, who looked not to Russia but to the success of America, and today we know the successes of Russia
So can
were
I come back
illusory.
at that period in a
By the way, brilliant comment section, guys. Thank you today. It's not like most comment sections are not good these days. Most days it's good only. It's that today I'm looking at the comment section more. But great points here. I want to discuss some things here. The idea here that though these stooges were all British educated, okay, I'm not going to use that word, but Nehru ruined the bureaucracy by ensuring that you couldn't fire them. Nehru closed his ears to criticism. Yes, his amendment to IAS Acts to ensure bureaucrats couldn't be fired, only transferred. See, all these are symptoms of one other problem that a lot of us on the Hindutva side say as a criticism to just the changing times. Okay, that the one argument that crony capitalism is bad, capitalism is good, etc. But you see, India was poor as fuck. Still, there was crony capitalism. But more importantly, things like travel vlogging, food vlogging, etc. Like one of our frequent viewers one day was saying that these days kids are busy with that. Why aren't they interested or busy with more, let's say, things that come across as a duty towards your society, culture, nation, etc. Well, not everyone is going to do that anyway. But you see, the beauty of the market today is that profession existed even in a pre-1991 India or even a pre-2020 India, in a pre-2010 India. It was called travel and living, the channel. People would roam around doing those exact same things, albeit with much more finesse, better scripts, better camera work, etc. But the main profession and the main audience base is the same. I am curious, not me personally, ever, but people are curious, how does a person feel when they visit this particular place, and what do they think of this particular place's food? What really is fascinatingly new in that? Nothing. Travelogues, okay, travel stories, bhromon kahinis, etc. They are just the ancient versions of travel vloggers. Of course, it takes less skill, you might say, but maybe it requires skill in a different way. What I'm saying is that things like travel vlogging, etc. By the way, a few days back, I saw a weird criticism of 1991 liberalization that women started dressing differently since 1991 in Bollywood. Okay. The problem is, everything that you can say that is happening today in India, it's because of too much focus on money, etc. All those things, all those professions existed even in pre-1991 India. Those professions were available to only a few bunch of families, very, very few families with insanely prosperous lineages. That is the only difference, okay? Any look today on Instagram can be found on any Indian woman, okay? Because of some latest reel and stuff. So the pre-1991 Indian look that you are seeking in women, which apparently has disappeared since 1991, you can still find it in some movie that harks back to the pre-1991 days, or will come back as part of some Instagram reel trend and something. Nothing is really going away. But more people have access to stuff that were closed off to 99% of the country. This is why the 1991 liberalization is a good thing, and more such things, more such disruptions need to happen in India as soon as possible.
More different way. I am puzzled about the following.
And one very important comment from Darth Vader here, where he is kind of contradicting himself. He's saying Nehru had the absolute power. He could have focused on industrialization rather than preaching peace and creating licensed state. Why didn't they, Darth Vader? You said that there's no need of democracy. In fact, we should not have democracy in order to industrialize. Nehru had absolute power. Why didn't he? Why couldn't he liberalize? Because he was a victim, because he was also a gullible nutjob who was a victim of the discourse of his day. We just need to change the discourse of today, the narratives of today. That's what I'm saying.
Propositions. In 1947, while everything you describe about the ideology was there, the scale of intervention into the economy was relatively modest. Okay, so the civil service quality was extremely high. We've never had a better civil service in India than was present in 1947. And the scale of intervention into the society was relatively mild. The level of freedom was relatively high. And we were off to the races with a reasonably decentralized economy.
M. Shastri, brilliant point. People like Farishta, those travelers, Fahi and Huan Sang, they were travel vloggers. They were just better travel vloggers. It's not like every travel vlogger is bad. Are you really saying that every travel vlogger is bad? Every food vlogger is bad? No, that's not the case, right? People, I'm sure you all do watch some travel vlogger or food vlogger from time to time. I do watch a lot of travel vloggers, people who go on those walks in places that I really want to visit someday, like through the ruins of Pompeii, then on the streets of St. Andrews, etc. They are travel vloggers as well. I'm following them.
Where people were calling the shots and the people were deciding many things. Gradually, the loss of freedom began. Okay, day after day, the restrictions started coming in. State agencies started flexing their muscles and controlling the lives of the people more and more. What I find puzzling and disappointing is how long this took before any self-correction came about. It is okay to be wrong. It is not okay to be impervious to the evidence. It is tragic and disappointing for that intellectual community, who I continue to respect in many ways. These were some of the smartest people.
Our smartness ye ki habe. See, this is the difference between Lee Kuan Yew and our ruling class.
You could have got, but they responded to failure by intensification. There was a commitment to ideology which is disappointing, and it seems that every time there was a failure, there would be these debates around a Hindu rate of growth, and the answer was to remain locked in that ideology and to insist that the floggings will continue until the morale improves. And to me, that is just tragic and a failure. That it's okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to refuse to change course. That pragmatism was lost in the commitment to an ideology.
I want to make...
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. This is what happens when you listen to an actually good professor who can articulate things properly and beautifully, unlike me. This is why probably YouTube is not going to change discourse. Maybe podcasts will, but not stuff like mine, I guess. But you see, what Shekhar is pointing out here, a brilliant comment. He's saying before independence, civil service officers had to impress their masters, but after their masters left, they had no reason to impress anyone. So they returned to their original motto to look down upon us. Unknowingly, or maybe knowingly, you've stumbled upon a very, very important point that I made a few months back, that you are not realizing, you are being racist when you say that you have actually received independence. It could be argued that way. You don't have independence. The system is exactly the same, almost. At least since 2014, 2017, 18, it has changed a bit, but it's largely the same system. You just don't think it's that oppressive or extractive, etc. It's not really extractive. It's not, the wealth is not really going away to some places, except maybe secret accounts of some netas. But anyway, the way of the functioning of the state is exactly the same. You think colonialism doesn't exist today because that system is being run by brown people instead of white people. There's no other difference.
Two points, and one is a really broader point, and it's about a debate which is, I think, at the heart of India today and what we need to think about, and that is a constant tussle between state and society. It's something I've discussed in many of my episodes of The Seen and the Unseen. Last night I was chatting with Vinay Sitapati on the phone, and he also brought it up, and I agree with him that this is at the core of the break of 1947, that couple of things happened.
Sorry to interrupt the video again, but great comments, and I really need to reply to these things. This point by Abhay here. He's saying that our policymakers kept on blaming Hindu culture for the for their, because of their absurd policies, the problems created by their absurd policies. But more importantly, what Buddhadev is saying here, that actually it is difficult to understand when you should go harder on the same path and when you should change course. Not really Buddhadev. People go down the wrong paths, especially from the government side, etc., when the government or the bureaucracy running the government is insulated from market realities. Otherwise, you are getting continuous feedbacks that this is working, this is not working. That's what Sandeep Sanyal used to say up until like 2 years back. You check out Sandeep Sanyal's interviews from 2015-16 onwards up until 2022-23. Okay, he was a completely different man. I guess now he has given up a lot. He doesn't think that the government is going to do anything significant because they have their elections to worry about. But he was talking about exactly these things, that continuous feedback. Get a feedback, change it. Now, what I've heard from people continuously is that things have actually gotten better. That central government officers or departments reply to you soon, within minutes and stuff. I've gotten examples from many people. But the problem is they are doing it out of sheer fear of Narendra Modi. Maybe they'll feel some fear of Yogi Adityanath as well. What's going to happen when again a person comes who says that, yes, okay, you chill in your work a little and you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Or the person is just simply is not competent enough to command that kind of fear. We can't depend or let's say hope for such PMs to come forever and after. So you see, Narendra Modi has not made the system better. He has put the fear of God or himself, him being the avatar of Vishnu, into them. That's not improving a system. As for Sandeep Sanyal's nuts and bolts changes, yes, they are changes. They are changes, but if they were really taking feedbacks from the market, they would have done a lot more things, especially academia and stuff.
One is, you think of, our early leaders, those who framed our constitution, and others, sitting in Delhi where the country seems to be falling apart, right? All around them. So obviously there is an urge to centralize. There is an urge to make sure that the center does indeed hold, right? And indeed, I sometimes think of the next few months that follow what Sardar Patel and VP Menon did as a kind of a fast-track colonization of India. What the British took 200-300 years to do, we did in a matter of a couple of years. And I have a great episode on VP Menon on that, which I'll link from the show notes as well. And so there was that centralizing impulse for a political reason, number one. Number two, there was a centralizing impulse for a social reason, where someone like Ambedkar, one of our great thinkers, the giant of the 20th century, looks around him and says that, listen, we can't be too decentralized because villages are dens of localism, ignorance, etc., etc. Essentially, they're riddled with caste, which is, one of our original sins.
Caste is our original sin. Meanwhile, our viewer has sent me money to buy a book which he wants me to discuss on our live streams. The book will arrive tomorrow. It's called Yucatan Caste War. There were caste systems in Germany, USA, France, etc. There are books called caste in Germany, caste in America, etc. Castes are just status groups. It's not our original sin. It's an inevitable machination of humanity.
And therefore, if you just say decentralize and all of that, it's not going to happen. We'll all slowly go to hell. So you need a transformative constitution, as it were, which is a phrase I kind of despise because it carries with it, connotations of so much state coercion and so much social engineering, which can never work and which hasn't worked, and we know it cannot. But that is, you understand that impulse, that you simply cannot leave it to our basest instincts as reflected in village life, what Ambedkar had seen and experienced himself. So you understand.
So he still has that messiah approach to that that civilizing tendency which never works out in real life. Buddhadev, how do I buy you a book? You send me the money on GPay and trust me that I'm going to buy the book, and I'm going to post the fact that I bought that book after the book arrives. I'm not going to give out my address. And which reminds me, since I'm taking that online philosophy course, I'll now get back to discussing the history of Indian philosophy books as well, because it will be nice to read that in light of whatever I learned about Western philosophy. That will be real fun. Or maybe send a book that I already have. No, send the money. Lol. But anyway, here's something that also needs to be pointed out. That if Modi is a god king and he is doing good, which he's doing, what's the country gonna do if a devil king comes to power? This is something lost on people. This is something lost on Hindutwadi socialists. No bad person is ever going to come to power. No lazy person is ever going to come to power. Everyone from here to eternity is going to be as efficient, as hardworking, as workaholic as Narendra Modi. They have this blind fucking belief. Someone said that, why are you being so rude to that IF wing commander guy from Twitter? He's much older than you and he has served the country, etc. Yes, but there's only so much socialism I can tolerate. He was going on saying that that Sanatan economics is a real idea, and whenever I brought up incentives, he would say that no, it's just your colonized Abrahamized mind which thinks that people will do good only if there is incentives. No, people can be good even without incentives, as proven by pre-Mughal Bharatavarsha, where everyone gave everyone blowjobs. But then I say, why are you so dependent on a moral person coming to power? What's your guarantee that a moral person will come to power? He says that moral person is already sitting in the Prime Minister's chair. Narendra Modi is that man. And he has brought all the morals of the world to that chair, and therefore it's all the society bureaucracy is getting filled with morals more and more every day, and that's how it's going to be forever and after now, since he's going to leave the scent of his morals in the Prime Minister's office. It's being said by a guy who's a retired wing commander of the Indian Air Force.
His sense that, okay, to build a great society, we must centralize, we must direct it from the top down, we must teach them how to think. I say teach them how to think because our friend Madhav Khosla talks about how the constitution was a pedagogic exercise as much as an exercise for setting rules, right? So these are two: political, social, and then there was economic, where again Nehru is coming from a point of saying that, hey, the East India Company failed us, profit is a dirty word, capitalism is bad, I hate these bania capitalists, blah blah blah. And therefore this, and there is in all of these people, and they're all elites in a sense, right? And there is in all of these people this sense that we are above the people and we will forge a better world. They know not what they are doing. And I think that there was a certain folly here. I think in a sense today's, that arrogance has been consequential, that society has caught up with politics today. And again, let's not get into current day politics, but I think there was a mistake there by those who wanted liberal values and a free society to say that that can only be imposed from the top down, whereas I continue to believe, though it would have been difficult to see then or argue then, that it can only happen from the bottom up. So that is one, the social level, and two, at the economic level, what it did, Nehru's move towards central planning and some of the policies that I'll ask you to expand on, is that that it created this environment where dissenters were completely shut out, the profit
Oh,
motive was shut out. Like P.
ऐसा है क्या?
Chidambaram, someone you know well, you worked with him, once said, quote, India suspected capitalists, it suspected the profit motive, and it tried to nail it down, block it, and thought that all growth would come from government planning. By the late 1980s, Korea was a miracle economy, and India was a stagnant, slow trot kind of economy. The whole idea that there was a big market out there did not strike Indian planners. Stock growth would come. And this is what strikes me, that when you say that, okay, we reached 5% growth rate from 47 to 62, approximately 5% or whatever, the thing is, it's great in comparison to the years immediately before, because you had the Second World War, you had so much social drive. It is terrible when you consider the counterfactuals of what happened in Southeast Asia, where Korea went, and all because of freedom, because they understood the power of concept.
Completely. So I just want to say, when you look at the Indian historical experience, the outcomes look decent. When you look under the hood, the inputs are actually pretty bad. So what is the conduct of policy is poor, and the news tightens as the years go by. So, as I said, right in 1947, there were decent levels of freedom. Exchange convertibility was there. You had full convertibility of the current account and the capital account for some time. Things like that. But then, bit by bit, it started getting worse, and a vast repressive machinery started getting established. And the decisive moment is, of course, Nehru's death in 64, which was preceded by the China War in 62.
So Ajay, let's talk about that period of 62 to 77. In fact, in the notes that I have in front of me, you've described that period as terrifying.
Yeah.
Take me through it. Give me the broad strokes. Also, give me some specifics so I can get a feel of what was going wrong there.
India was a precocious political project in a country in 1947 where women's literacy was 6%. There was the audacity of thinking that we'll have universal suffrage. And there were many skeptics, as there should be. It is odd and weird that in such an unprepared country, we are trying to do a complex constitution building project.
और वो भी भोसरी के नाम का सफरेज. वोटिंग राइट तो आज तक किसी के पास प्रॉपरली नहीं है, एटलीस्ट इन वेस्ट बंगाल टुडे. शायद बाकी जगहों में आ गया है पूरा का पूरा वोटिंग राइट्स, बट if it's based on fear or bad voting systems etc, who gives a shit even if you have a voting right or not. तो ये जो जीनियस मतलब वर्चू सिग्नलिंग का जो स्किल है कौमियों का, सोशलिस्ट का, वो ही तब भी नेहरू में भी दिख गया था कि वोटिंग राइट पहले सबको दे देते हैं और सबको बोलते हैं कि देखिए हम है फुल डेमोक्रेसी, यूएसए है भोसरी के हाफ डेमोक्रेसी. तो ऐसा सफरेज का क्या मतलब है?
Republic, as it were, trying to come about in a place where, really...
And with all credit to our founders, if I may interrupt, they got this one thing really right. We've been kind of criticizing, Nehru and the other makers of the Constitution and all of that, but they did so much right in building those institutions and keeping us free and secular. It's a big deal.
Yeah. The optimism around that political project was severely challenged by the 1962 to 1977 project, and many people thought that this is going to turn into yet another disgusting third world authoritarian country, or worse, that this country will collapse into civil war. So let's walk just a quick sketch of the events. 1962 was the China War. 1964, Nehru died. In 65, there was a war with Pakistan. There were 2 consecutive droughts. There was famine in the country. India was begging for food aid from the United States, the PL 480. Then came the 71 war. While the 71 war was a nationalist wet dream, it was also...
हमको यूएसए से बेटर पता है इकोनॉमिक्स कैसे रन करना है, मगर भीख किससे मांगना है? यूएसए से.
So an enormous economic burden for a poor country. It was expensive to do these things. In 1969, Indira Gandhi nationalized the banks, and there was a whole wave of economic repression, like the Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, the FERA of 1973. Okay, and all of which led to an economic collapse in the early 70s. It is striking to see how quickly the euphoria of the Bangladesh war and Indira Gandhi's mind-blowing Lok Sabha victory turned into an abysmal economic collapse, double-digit inflation, the JP agitation, and then we got to the emergency. So this is the terrifying period, that the economic growth was in bad shape. The conduct of the state turned from bad to horrendous, and there was a collapse of freedom. There was the decline into the emergency. And the critics of the Indian project could wag their fingers and say, "We told you so." That this is a dumb idea, that a free India, which will try to become a republic and have a one man, one vote, will just not work. And it is the fate of poor countries to turn into disgusting authoritarian countries. Populists will always win. Remember, the first Prime Minister of India who is classified by political scientists as a populist was Indira Gandhi. And this was the period where really our optimism in the entire Indian dream was shaken. And there were many serious people who thought that this is not going to work. We're just going to become another disgusting authoritarian third world country with no redeeming features.
So I just want to say that, we had an episode on the 91 reforms with Shruti Rajgopalan, you and I, on the Seen and the Unseen with Shruti. We spoke a lot about this. Shruti for the Mercatus Center does the 1991 project, fantastic project. She wrote this absolutely magisterial essay talking about this period, and I want to quote a couple of lines from there.
Oh shit, looks like I said that castes are just status based hierarchies, and they are not the original sin of India. And a woman becoming richer and then not talking to his ex-boyfriend is also casteism, and most people left the live stream. Shit.
Where about this Indira period, she wrote, by the time Nehru's daughter Indira Gandhi took office, the official goal was to nationalize all means of production. Her government nationalized the 14 largest banks overnight through an ordinance, and also nationalized coal and copper mines, general insurance, unprofitable textile.
Yeah, even Savarkar was in favor of nationalizing banks. ठीक है, we can forgive some degrees of socialism amongst these people for those reasons, that business से ईस्ट इंडिया कंपनी आ गया, फिर देश ही हड़प लिया.
Firms, the list goes on. Land ceiling laws, monopoly control, greater control over foreign exchange, inflexible labor regulations, disallowing the closure of unprofitable firms, and a hostile attitude to foreign investment. Some goods were hit with an import tariff of over 350%. The top income tax rate was 97.75%. All this cumulatively unleashed an informal and corruption-driven underground economy that some suspected was larger than the formal sector. By the late 1970s, it was almost impossible to set up a new business or to exit a falling business. And she also points out, for example, that there was a joke that when a girl child got married, people would tell her parents, book a scooter, so that by the time her wedding comes around, the scooter has been delivered. Those were the days. Like, India was the one country in the world where a second-hand car cost more than a new car, because a new car would take years to get delivered. The second-hand car was already there. And a lot...
क्योंकि हमको बचाया जा रहा था इविल कैपिटलिज्म से. बाबू हमें बचा रहे थे, जिनके पास फ्री का एम्बेसडर बैठा है, जिनके पास फॉरेन टूर्स के टिकट्स पड़े हैं, ठीक है. और रिमेंबर रेडियोज, फॉर रेडियोज यू नीडेड लाइसेंस. तो I think if we have time, after this we'll check out a bit of Thomas Sowell's views on how India was pre-1991. Those are absolutely juicy.
A lot of this was driven by politics. It wasn't even as if Indira Gandhi, had these convictions. It is just that she needed to sort of distinguish herself from the syndicate, as it were, with people like Morarji Desai. And this was tactically what she did to get the left on her side, this leftward tilt. And this is what I find, this is what breaks my heart. She didn't even believe in this shit. She was just a sociopath who didn't give a damn, who would do whatever it took to get to power. And people often talk about, the emergency, where of course half the opposition was in jail. You and I would have been in jail had we lived then. They talk about that as the worst of her excesses. And I really think her economic regulations were far worse. They kept millions of people in India in poverty for decades.
Yes, Darth Vader, yes. See, we have a point of agreement again. What a brilliant point here. He's saying even if you annihilate Hinduism, caste will not go away. Ambedkar was wrong. Abso-fucking-lutely yes. Which is why caste today or forever has existed in other places where there was no Hinduism, where there was no Manusmriti. Castes are not, and by the way, what Ash said here, it's not classism at this point, bro. Let's say caste or statuses do have something to do with economics, okay? I'm not excluding the economics question completely, but it moves away from just economics very, very quickly because it then becomes an exclusive group with common consumption patterns and discrimination towards some people based on your consumption patterns, not exactly your economic station in life, okay? That's why we need to call it casteism and not classism. And let's say a Trinamool Gunda in your neighborhood wears gold chains and stuff all day long, wears those white half-sleeve shirts, white pants, and 5,000 rupee white shoe. Okay. Do you think one fucking sane man is going to allow his daughter to get married to that guy? He has economics in his favor. Maybe his father was a gunda for CPM, he is a gunda for Trinamool now. 2 जनरेशन में हो गया इकोनॉमिक्स, एकदम करेक्ट जगह पे पहुंच गया है, मगर उसका स्टेटस अभी तक नहीं हाई हुआ है, उसका कल्चरल कैपिटल सोशल कैपिटल अभी भी कुछ नहीं है. लोग उसके पास जाते हैं, पीछे उसको गाली भी देता है, उसके पास जाता है कुछ काम वाम करवा लेने के लिए, ठीक है. दैट्स द एंड ऑफ इट. ऑन द अदर हैंड, he could have become a high status person if his father, which has been done by many people, who was a hypothetical CPIM gunda, who would have sent their children to better schools. Let's say he saves up his black money, his ill-gotten money, his God-forsaken money and stuff, and sends his kids to South Point, La Martiniere, etc. That kid does not grow up without cultural capital and social capital. He becomes a respectable person, even if he does not have the same amounts of money as his black money owning CPM Gunda father had. So economics is not completely out of the question, but if you look at just economics, you won't be able to solve the problem properly because you're not diagnosing the problem properly, because the problem itself, the discrimination itself, is not based on just the bank balance. It's based on other things, i.e. Exclusive group and their common consumption patterns. How you eat, what you eat, what sports do you watch, how do you watch it, etc. We've discussed those things, so you'll have to check out our other live streams. So I'm not going to get into that topic too much now.
It's longer than necessary, and especially in the way that they stopped that labor-intensive manufacturing revolution that could have happened. Again, here's the Angus Madison chart. Look at where China takes off. India could have taken off before this, and we didn't. We had everything. We had the people who are our greatest strength, and we never did, and that kind of breaks my heart. But in all this, in the darkest moment, there is still hope, and I want you to talk about, we all keep saying 91 with good reason, the 91 reforms, incomplete as they were, much as they left a lot to be desired, got hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It has deep emotional value to me. It changed our lives. It certainly changed my life. But your point, which has been underscored by other guests I've had on this show, like the great Montek Singh Ahluwalia, is that it wasn't something that happened overnight in 91. That from the late 70s, it was there in the making, a silent revolution of people biding their time. Tell me about that.
हाँ, फिर भी अल्टीमेटली हुआ वो डेस्परेशन की वजह से. सद्दाम ने वो ऑयल कतार इन्वेट कर लिया, जीडीपी ग्रोथ रेट 1.1% में आके रुक गया, वो सब हुआ था. फिर हमको वर्ल्ड बैंक के पास, WMF के पास, IMF के पास भीख मांगना पड़ा. उन्होंने बोला खोलो इकोनॉमी, फिर देखते हैं कुछ करते हैं. उसके बाद ही हुआ.
On the history of ideas, yes, of course, Indira Gandhi is responsible for a lot of the terrible things there. But as with Nehru, she reflected that climate of opinion. I think of it as a failure of the Indian intellectual class. It was the intellectuals who were seduced by state power and central planning and the Soviet model and all that. It was the leftism of Indian intellectuals as a class which created the conditions in which these excesses could happen. And also around Indira Gandhi, I love the line that it was only Sanjay Gandhi's mother who could have declared the emergency, and it was only Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter who could have declared elections. So there was something in her mind which prevented her from going full third world tyrant. And we now know, because of the leaked information that has come out from that period that was flowing in the diplomatic bag, that it was clear to many, many people that Indira Gandhi was embarrassed about the emergency, and it was only a question of when and the elections would take place. And when the elections took place in 1977,
Months back, we had a guest called Debjani Bhattacharya. I don't remember if I did the podcast in English or Bengali. So she said something fascinating. I'm reminded of that right now. That women in positions of power get away with a lot more than men can. So Mamata Banerjee, Indira Gandhi, the things they get away with saying and doing, a man would never get away with. I mean, in India, I guess every politician in the end gets away with things, but the pushbacks would be much fiercer and much sooner, etc. So in that context, I want to remind people that you are being misogynist if you think women are not capable of violence or bad behavior. I would of course, I think, concede the point that women do become evil much later in their life. So if you know someone from their 20s and something, you can never figure out what kind of a person they'll become in their 30s or 40s especially. But please acknowledge the fact that women can be just as much as holy as a man, and we forget that during most times of our life, whether while dating or talking to a teacher who's a woman, or while electing women in positions of power. They can be as evil, if not more. And they can be more evil than men because they can get away with more, because people don't inherently or implicitly realize that they can be evil in the first place.
They were truly free and fair elections. There was no intimidation of opposition parties. There was no messing with election booths and so on. So we lucked out in that episode. Okay, we went to the brink of catastrophe.
We also lucked
and we
out
came
because
back.
she actually thought she would win the elections when she called them, and Sanjay Gandhi did not want her to call the elections. He wanted
So
her to be
it's a
dictator for
little
life.
more than that. And I think the best reading of history today is that Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter was just embarrassed at becoming one more third world tyrant. Okay, she was too good for that.
You see, this is the casteism that nobody speaks about. Indira Gandhi ke dil mein dard hua tha. She was embarrassed, and we are convinced of it because she apparently wrote it somewhere in a secret memo. But we are convinced of it. Why? Because she was Jawaharlal Nehru's daughter. तो यही है भाई basis of casteism. The lineage based caste problem. Okay, casteism has different kinds of problem. Casteism has different aspects to it. But you see, one of those is that it has to be lineage based and birth based, and everyone, of course, inherently looks at whether someone comes from a good family or not. But basing so much on just their parentage is absolutely casteism. And like even Arthashastra says that these are the qualities one must have: full qualification, this and that, but must be from a good family. Now, मेरा जो पेंगुइन का अर्थशास्त्र है वो बहुत सैनिटाइज्ड है, मुझे ये खरीदना नहीं चाहिए था. इसमें वो ब्लैक मैजिक तंत्रा का सब पार्ट्स हटा दिया है ट्रांसलेटर ने खुद से. उनका एक्सप्लेनेशन है इंट्रोडक्शन में कि वो कुछ मतलब अजीबोगरीब ब्लैक मैजिक होगा. वी आर नॉट एग्जैक्टली श्योर हाउ मच चाणक्य बिलीव्ड इन इट, सो फक दैट शिट. यू डोंट हैव टू नो. आई एम गोइंग टू डिसाइड फॉर यू whether tantra is really true or not, and I'm going to decide for you whether you must read it from or not, and whether you must know Chanakya followed it or not. What the fuck? Guess what the profession of that translator was? He wrote this after retiring from the Indian Foreign Service, a lifelong babu. But anyway, it's still the only Arthashastra I've read. But even there, Chanakya mentions the people, the bureaucrats must be from good families. Now, good family का मतलब क्या है? आर्या वार्या बोला होगा वहाँ पे, तो इन्होंने सैनिटाइज करके भाई गुड फैमिली बना दिया है उसको. बट आर्या ऑल्सो मेंट ब्राह्मण फैमिलीज. And I guess it's kind of understandable that might not be entirely understandable, but I guess Chanakya's argument would have been that if he's from a Brahmin or Amatya-like family, he probably knows that his trade better. But if you are qualifying it with other qualifications, then why need a good family lineage again? So, since there are debates of whether there was a person called Chanakya or not, whether Arthashastra is written by one person or not, we are not going to discuss Chanakya too much in this context. But what the fuck are these two guys saying? Why is Indira Gandhi more believable just because her father was Nehru, who was a goddamn Fabian socialist who fucked the country anyway? What logic is this? Not only are we saying that she comes from a great family, on the other hand, we are also acknowledging that her father did bad things for India. These two things are going on parallelly at the same time. 77 onwards. West
then we
Bengal's
get to
वो upward mobility शुरू हुआ जब से.
1977. So the Janata Party came to power, okay, and there were three great Gujaratis who became the most powerful people in the country. Morarji Desai was the Prime Minister, H.M. Patel was the Finance Minister, D.T. Lakdawala was the Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, okay, and they understood a sense about the way the 60s and the 70s had gone bad. These were not radical reformers, but these were people who had instinct around the working of markets. So remember, D.T. Lakdawala had always been in Bombay University. He was never part of the leftist ethos of Delhi and the great economics organizations of Delhi. H.M. Patel had grown up in the proximity of Amul and the cooperative movement and so on. It was
maybe India's next intellectual revolution can happen far from Delhi and lonely Karjat.
Yeah, so if the best ideas are always incubated far away. The further away you are from power, the more clearly you see. So these people started a gentle process of turning the ship. And there are very important staffing decisions which had to be done in order to bring in fresh ideas. And slowly the liberalization of the economy began. They would seem like small, trifling measures in some sense today, but in that age they were important. And I want to locate the
And this is kind of a good point. It's not really a complete point though, that good ideas do come up when they are farthest away from power, but those ideas become impactful and see the light of the day or get used and gain recognition only when they are close to power, unfortunately. Otherwise, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu would have been a great idea even in Brazil. They had to come to USA.
these around the words private sector confidence. Always and always and always. There is only one source of economic growth, and that is the private sector. And when the private sector feels good about the future, then the private sector responds by committing themselves to building firms. So the heart and soul of the story is always the hours per day that the leadership cadre of the private sector commits themselves to the project of building firms, to the extent to which their kids are committed to the same project, to the extent to which their money is being put back into the project. Okay, so the heart and soul of all Indian progress is a sense of optimism and trust in the eyes of the private sector. So the long night of the 62 to 77 period ended, and the private sector started cautiously trusting again and getting back into building businesses.
And we started fucking our state right from then onwards. When rest of India decided, chalo thoda zyada ho gaya. There was a great dialogue in one movie by Satyajit Ray, a Feluda movie, his famous detective that he created, famous kids storybooks. So there was a dialogue. Lalmohan Ganguly, a comic character in the story, when a Rajasthani coolie in Jaipur asks him for some tips and stuff, he says, "Kafi ho gaya, jada ho gaya." So in 1977, the rest of the country decides, ये socialism वगैरह थोड़ा काफ़ी हो गया, ज़्यादा हो गया, थोड़ा थोड़ा कम करते हैं. West Bengal decides, नहीं, हुआ ही नहीं. अब कहाँ शुरू किए? अब तो हम शुरू करेंगे. Real socialism has not been tried yet. अब हम करेंगे.
And taking interest in improving their organizations. And that kicked off growth surprisingly quickly. 1979 is a date that is stuck in my head, because when you do the careful econometrics, the date at which growth acceleration is announced in the econometric work is 1979. So some things were begun in 77 and they rapidly had an impact, and in 1979 it was visible as an acceleration of GDP growth. And then Indira Gandhi came back to power, and she actually carried these ideas further. She didn't go back to her old style socialism. And then when Rajiv Gandhi became PM, again, he was a more modern person. He started pushing in many important directions. And so there was a sustained clarity around that period. Late in the 1980s, there was a big fiscal balance of payments disaster, which led up to the 91 program. Now, in the same period from 77 onwards, we also got a blossoming of Indian economic thinking. So I said that Nehru and Indira Gandhi and her period contained an intellectual landscape that was fundamentally leftist, that was basically inspired in a Marxian or a Soviet view of the world. That started changing in many important ways. Manmohan Singh's PhD thesis in 1964 was famously one of the first intellectual products which questioned export pessimism from India. At the time, people believed that because our skins are brown, we'll never be able to export. And Manmohan Singh was one of the early people to say, no, it's about incentives, it's about prices, it's about exchange rates. And it is possible for India to export and export well, and it is not something weird about India that this is infeasible. So a new set of ideas started bubbling in. For example, Monte Ahluwalia came to work for Rajiv Gandhi. Okay, these kinds of people carried new ideas. Of course, I've heard a lot about this period from Vijay Kelkar, who had come to work in the Planning Commission and at first had very leftist and communist views. But over the years, he also started questioning many of those things, and I've
Nice.
had the joy and the luxury of speaking with him in detail about his journey of ideas and about questioning the world. I think in that period, a lot of the Indian intellectual elite was just simply embarrassed by the success in East Asia. And again, you got to place this in perspective. In 1947, if there was a country where things were supposed to go well, it was India. Okay, this is the
हाँ,
country.
अब शेम नाम का जो चीज़ है वो भी अब एलिट्स के पास नहीं है। पहले था कि देख रहे थे कि अरे साउथ ईस्ट एशिया में हम जा रहे हैं छुट्टी वुट्टियों में, तो बढ़िया देश बना लिया है। अब तो सब कुछ के लिए यूएसए जाएंगे भी, बच्चों को भेजेंगे भी, फिर भी कौमी ही रहेंगे। खुद पीएचडी करने के लिए भी यूएसए जाएंगे, खुद यूएसए में नौकरी भी करेंगे। बट यूएसए इज़ बैड फॉर डूइंग स्लेवरी, which is getting workers without their consent. USA is bad for incentivizing workers to come to USA and work, and it's also bad for now saying that they don't want more immigrants, even if it's legally. They're going to let's say dial down. They have given hints. All three of it is bad, because the main I think basis for leftist politics and leftist thinking is just plain and simple complaining and complaining. Diagnose a problem, crib about it, end of story.
Of Gandhiji and Tagore and Ramanujan and Nehru and just, outrageously great people. So nowhere else amongst poor countries did you have that kind of intellectual capital. Did you have that kind of proud...
And you see, none of that intellectual capital happened because of our socialism. All that intellectual capital happened because of the prosperity brought about in Kolkata or Maharashtra because of the East India Company or the British government in general.
Elite that could actually plug into this global state-of-the-art knowledge and do a rapid catch-up to British levels of per capita GDP. If there was a place to do it, it was India. And it was deeply embarrassing for the Indian elite that actually East Asia ran ahead of...
The problem is, जिन लोगों को लगता है कि casteism is because of Hinduism, that's the same kind of thinking that trapped Bengalis into thinking that अब हमारे है रविंद्रनाथ बंकिम विवेकानंदो, therefore you see, I think there must be something in that bullshit fish that we eat, or in that mishti doi, which sends intellect down our veins like this, and it goes up in the brain, and we go through a shock and become intellectual all of a sudden. Our intellect happened because Kolkata was the financial capital of the country. It was the capital of the country. If Chhaprao had become the place where all the British people decided to go, that's where the Rabindranath Pandey would happen. No, make no mistakes about that. No race is inherently dumb or intelligent. Everything comes down to the economics of that region. In the same way, casteism happened everywhere. Status-based discrimination happened everywhere. It lived on in India in the garb of caste, and people still keep it alive with their cosplay and fancy dress competitions because of state incentivization. Because you get political benefits out of it in your mofussil town and village. You don't play your caste card in the city much. You don't get to play it even if you want to. Maybe you'll play it one more generation. Your kids are not going to follow your caste.
India. And I think they got slapped in the face, and the better amongst them started asking first principles questions that, this ain't working. I want to emphasize Arun Shuri in this process. Arun Shuri does not get enough recognition. He was a deeply grounded scholar in India, and many things that are attributed to Western scholars worldwide had actually been discovered and understood and articulated by Arun Shuri here in India first. And so these kinds of people really understood the venality and failure of the Indian socialist project of building agencies that will terrorize people and put people in jail and take bribes and all that. So there was a community, there was a literature of thinking people, of interesting people, who bit by bit started reducing the chokehold on the economy. And that took place from 77 onwards through the 80s.
77 onwards.
Their first cut was the domestic economy. So they did not touch the external side a whole lot, but many mistakes of public policy within the country were addressed through the 70s and 80s, and they did give gains through that period. And then the big thing that changed with 91 was reducing tariff barriers and improving the convertibility on the current account and a little bit of openness on the capital account. So all these things, they built on each other. Whenever we see grand social phenomena, it will never happen that there's a one-shot event or one single explanation. The world evolves through many, many actions, and then a new mood gets established in the eyes of the private sector. Always and always we should focus that what is the confidence of the private sector? Does the private sector feel optimistic about where India is going? Does the private sector feel safe about what is happening in the country? Then the private sector responds by bountifully investing, committing their emotions and people into building organizations in India, and then the growth follows.
There's a great quote by Abraham Lincoln about, if I have 6 hours to cut a tree, I'll spend the first 5 sharpening the axe.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that I can read into this a lesson that we must all sharpen our axes, even if we'll never cut a tree. But we have to do it because when the opportunity comes, then we can do something with it. And I've had an episode with Vinay Sitapati or Narasimha Rao, another great figure of this period. And what strikes me when I read about these people, and Shruti's the 1991 project at the Mercatus Center, that has chronicles and oral histories of so many of these people, and they always fill me with awe, because it is not as if in 1991 they got together and said crisis hai karte hai. No, for a decade and a half before that, they were working away, playing the long game, building ideas and
building each other.
And that's
so I want to show 2 periods which are really inspiring.
AK Brahmo, good question. I think if you don't compare it with other countries, then it can be called prosperous. But even then, there might be an issue of not really competing with the rest of the world and stuff. But if there are ideally only good people who want prosperity, who want capitalism, etc., but don't want to trade with the rest of the world, in that situation, it can be prosperous. But of course, not as prosperous as the rest of the world, because everyone else will take care of their comparative advantage and trade with other countries. If you are talking about this one hypothetical country who does not want to trade with other countries but wants to remain prosperous inside their own borders, they'll need a big enough population for production and consumption. It will have to let go of its comparative advantage discussions. But it can be prosperous enough only if those idealist people remain in power, etc. Because unless they are facing the brunt of real life market competition, realities, etc. from the rest of the world, they're not going to do so, in my opinion. But if they are, they can be. But even then, it will never be as prosperous as other countries in the world.
Inspiring for all of us, and the first of them is, roughly speaking, 1927 to 1947. Okay, in that period, you would be forgiven for thinking that the British Empire is infinitely powerful and there will never be a free India, so why bother? But the best and brightest of India actually dug in and bothered, and for better or for worse, they were each other's community. Okay, they wrote longhand letters to each other, and they argued and debated furiously about rival conceptions of what is.
Maybe racism fucked India. Everyone refused to listen to those intellectuals. They only refused to Bengal intellectuals based on the sort of culture and based on the social capital that Bengalis had gathered in the entire country. They were the only ones, I guess, getting respect. So the Bengali commies convinced everyone that no, since we are Bengalis and we are commies, therefore being commie is a better idea. What a day for fuck ups. Glad we are back.
They argued and debated furiously about rival conceptions of what is India. The INC was a big tent. It accommodated all kinds of views, ranging from more anarchist to less anarchist, and they argued about what it meant to be free. So that when 1947 came along,
Oh, I forgot to cast the screen. Lol. Wait. फिर से ये सब सेटिंग करना पड़ेगा. उफ. इसको यहाँ पे लाओ.
there were people and there were documents and there was but the best and brightest of India actually dug in and bothered, and for better or for worse, they were each other's community. Okay, they wrote longhand letters to each other, and they argued and debated furiously about rival conceptions of what is India. The INC was a big tent. It accommodated all kinds of views, ranging from more anarchist to less anarchist, and they argued about what it meant to be free. So that when 1947 came along, there were people and there were documents and there was a body of knowledge which could go forward. And these people did not say that, oh, show me the pathway to gaining power to become some officer in some powerful government organization, and you show me that career track, then today I will invest in knowledge. Okay, and that's like a very narrow and selfish view of each person's place in society.
And if I may say so, just as we should remember those who fought that fight, we should also remember those who did not.
Yes, the vast majority, the mainstream, were just the appeasers. They collaborated with the British, and we should respect and admire the people who were willing to sign on to such journeys. Exactly the same story played out 1962 to 1977. I was born in 1966, and I have extensively had the opportunity to talk about this period with my elders, and this is the same story. Of course, there was despondence. There were many people who gave up and left the country. Okay, and every person had to make that call that, do you want to commit your life to this country? Do you want to commit your life to the project of studying this country? And there was no hope in sight. You never knew when the nightmare was going to end. And in fact, it looked like year after year, the nightmare just got worse. Okay, from the 62 war to another 65 war to 2 consecutive droughts to...
And that's when Vivek's parents left, and thank God they did, which is why today we have something called Vivek Ramaswamy to look up to.
bank nationalization to double-digit inflation, the JP Andolan, the emergency. It just seemed to get worse and worse. For a good, decent, upstanding participant of the Indian freedom movement, it was just grotesque seeing the rise of the populist nationalist Indira Gandhi. It was just grotesque seeing the freedoms being stripped away. But the point is, the best of us chose to dig in, to stay, to build knowledge and to build community. And it was done in a non-purposive way. Manmohan Singh did not return to India after his PhD in 1964 with the promise that you will one day become a finance minister or you will one day become a prime minister. He had no idea. Nobody would have bet on 1,000,000 to 1 odds that this was going to happen.
And
It was
when
just-
he
अच्छा, तो 1991 लिबरलाइजेशन का क्रेडिट सिर्फ मनमोहन सिंह को या नरसिम्हा राव को जाता है ऐसा नहीं है. ये उन सब वो इंटेलेक्चुअल्स को जाता है जिन्होंने इंडिया छोड़ा नहीं, अपने देश से प्रेम किया. मगर उनका सब प्रेम, सब सैक्रिफाइस, सब डिस्कोर्स तब काम आया जब डंडे पड़े IMF से. तो भाई डिस्कोर्स इन्होंने नहीं अफेक्ट किया.
advised his young mentee Montek Singh Ahluwalia, why don't you come back with me and work for the country? And Montek leaves the World Bank and he comes back to do that. He had
and
no
by the way,
idea
the
either.
same with Manmohan Singh and Kelkar. They met in a corridor at a conference in Kathmandu. And basically in the conversation, Manmohan Singh said something to Kelkar like, so you will come and work for us, won't you? And Kelkar just felt obliged to say, yes, sir, I will. And Kelkar had packed his bags and was back in India. So these were the people who had no promise of power or success. And for all you knew, the Indian project was going to crash.
I have an anecdote here for our viewers about Vijay Kelkar, your co-author. Great book in service of the Republic. In fact, the book is in service of the Republic. And when you guys recorded with me, if you remember that we were recording in a studio in car and there was a break and Mr. Kelkar went to the toilet, and when he came back, he pointed his finger at me and he said, Amit, I want to give you one piece of advice. So I thought, okay, some great piece of wisdom is going to come at me. And I said, yes, sir, tell me. So he said, every time you pass a toilet, enter it. So that is, the wise passing on their wisdom to younger folks.
So in similar fashion, I feel that people should not ask for fate to step out of the page of history and shake your hand. People should just be quiet and dig in and work hard. And you have no right to ask for any reward. But it is our job to build knowledge and build community. And we have no telling which way the world will go.
And the 91 reforms
RSS.
are both remarkable in what we managed to get done, also deeply sad in what we didn't manage to get to. We didn't get done. We didn't reform factor markets. Agriculture was left, etc., etc. We've spoken about that at length actually in our episode of the Seen and the Unseen. So I'll just point people to that. We've almost been talking for an hour now, and I want to ask you about the next aspect, the next phase of our history. We have always been lamenting that, okay, from 91 to 2011 we had a golden period where everything kind of went right, and we have since then what Pooja Mehra calls a lost decade. I've had an episode with Pooja on this. You've spoken about this to me a lot, and once again, it's not as if 2011 is where you see the economy go kind of down, but it's really 2008 that process sort of started. And just to kind of summarize, after independence we had sort of the Hindu rate of growth at 5% for the longest time, but better than what came before.
2008 to 2018 is the last decade when Sandeep Sanyal was cleaning up the banks, when people were not taking loans for just the GDP's sake. People were being held accountable. Capitalists were being held accountable, at the same time were being encouraged to become capitalists. That was the last decade.
And then 79 onwards, as you point out, in econometric terms, you see a jump, and it goes from 5 to 5.5, and then 91, 7.5 upwards and onwards. And since 2011, we've kind of been not doing so well. So tell me a little bit about two aspects of this. Why did we stop doing well? Did we take reforms for granted, and did we not realize that this has to be a continuous process and not just ad hoc policies here and there? And also, is there such an intellectual community still today which is still fighting the good fight?
It's important to
intellectual-
psychoanalyze what happened in the 91 to
हम
2011
इंटेलेक्चुअल कम्युनिटी नहीं है, हम थोड़ा ट्रोलर कम्युनिटी है, मगर हम है इस फाइट में. चलो और संख्या बढ़ाओ, उत्सव की तैयारी करो.
period. The Indian state was far from fixed. There were many, many things wrong with the working of the state. What I think the early years did was to tell the private sector a story that, yeah, things are really bad, but you know what? They're going to get better. That there are people running the place that know what to do, and we've got our shit together in terms of the work process, and year after year we'll make progress, and there is a direction in reforms. So the private sector was willing to suspend its disbelief and take the leap, saying, yeah, I know many things are deeply broken, but we're getting better, and we trust that there is a crew which will make things better. Okay, that was one part to it. The other part is something about the growth project and the social contract between the elite that is required to make any country work. In every country, there are four kinds of elite. There is the state, the political and the bureaucratic elite. There is a business elite. There is the intellectual elite. And then there is a cultural elite. These four elites interact with each other. And these four elites need to have a bargain, a compact, a social contract. The social contract in India in that period could be described as saying that
Four elites. Four. That number is interesting. Reminds us of some things.
the private sector was encouraged and comfortable and confident to go forth and invest, to go forth and build and take risks. And every now and then something would go wrong vis-a-vis the Indian state. Because remember, the Indian state was not fixed. Large chunks of nonsense littered the landscape in terms of the working of the Indian state. And every private person was going to hit landmines sometime or the other. What the elite compact gave was the optimism that, yeah, every now and then things will go wrong, but I will have the ability to file a bug report, and I will have the ability to find some recourse. So when things went wrong, you got an audience. There were people who would listen to what went wrong, and oftentimes they would solve it. There was an element of corruption in the way these things worked. But the bottom line is the private sector was not shown an impassive, cruel, and expropriatory state. It was shown medium optimism that, yeah, every now and then you will hit a landmine, but many of the times those landmines will get fixed. And remember, in the backdrop, some reforms process is going on, and there are really cool people who are the leadership of the economists and the officials and the politicians who get this shit. So when I was in the Ministry of Finance, we understood this very well. In the DEA, the Department of Economic Affairs of that age, every joint secretary would go out and do 2 conference speeches every week. Because part of the story was showing a capability, was showing a thought process. The private sector needed to see the kind of people they would respect. And they needed to see a vision, they needed to see a strategy. And when the private sector would see all that, they would feel confident and they would invest. And what went wrong over the 91 to 2011 period was that increasingly the deeds were inadequate compared to the words. And it became increasingly clear that there was a venal, expropriative, interfering state which was actually creeping and enhancing its powers. Okay, so one by one, horrible laws kept coming in. New kinds of powers were taken up by state agencies. Central planning got worse, not better. And like I say to you, my summary statistic is that there was less freedom in 2010 than there was in 2000. and there was less freedom in 2020 than there was in 2010. And that
Now, remember, हर वक्त इंडियन एलिट्स का जब कोई ना कोई पॉलिसी आइडिया आइडियोलॉजी काम नहीं आता है, पहले बोलते हैं कि ये तो मेरा इतना जो प्रेम है भारतीयों के लिए, उसी लिए मैं ये कर रहा हूँ. द मोमेंट दैट आइडिया गेट्स रिजेक्टेड और इट डजंट वर्क एंड डजंट लीड टू गुड थिंग्स इन द कंट्री, then they say that, you see, Indians in general are so dumb or bad or evil. That's why my idea didn't work. So, after that initial optimism about India's prosperity, when again Babudam, or let's say Babu's corruption affects all these things that he's talking about, all these things he just mentioned, the problems, all of that was because of the corruption of Babu's. Then people start saying in that ecosystem that, you see, Indians are so corrupt, that's why it's happening that way. Meanwhile, they didn't remove the disincentives for being a corrupt person, or the incentives for being a corrupt person. They still remained. You didn't disincentivize corruption, तो वो corrupt क्यों नहीं बनेगा? वो अच्छा हिंदू है. सुबह सुबह जितना मंत्र पाठ कर लो, तुम ऑफिस में जाके बैठोगे, अगर तुम्हारा करप्शन का चांस है, इट्स ओनली फकिंग लक एंड sheer good parenting and stuff that's stopping you from not being corrupt. And we, as a citizen of the country, can't hope for you having good parenting or having some nice morals and stuff. उससे नहीं होगा. हमको ऐसे incentive structures चाहिए जिससे कि you benefit from not being corrupt. Half the time तो ऐसा होता है कि you benefit out of being corrupt. Instead, you face so much problems in your profession if you are not corrupt, as corrupt as the other guy.
whole magic of private sector optimism was disrupted, and hence growth decayed. Now, in terms of a community of knowledge, are we building a new world of that knowledge? I'm cautiously optimistic that in some fundamental ways, the community that worked on 1991 to 2011 had weak knowledge of the first principles. So if you think about state capacity, public administration, law, freedom, market failure, regulation, some of the basic knowledge of that world was weak. So Kelkar and I wrote that book, first edition 2019, second edition 2022, reflecting the fact that a lot of those things that I think we today in the intellectual community take as solved were not known in 2010. So in that sense, there was a significant knowledge barrier there. A lot of good knowledge has been built. But on the other hand,
incentive structures were not known.
The working of government is just at a different plane altogether. And we never know when some of the lines will be connected up once again.
I want to think about the accidents of his history, the happy accidents, the sad accidents. To me, one happy accident certainly is that you had that continuity in politics right from the time where you had Narasimha Rao, who was the Prime Minister, who put all his political capital into making this happen, and the incredible cadre of people who worked with him in 91. But you had political continuity. You know, the Vajpayee government did a lot of good work. After that, Manmohan Singh did a lot of good work. I mean, just to kind of summarize for my listeners, and I have had episodes on this, I'll link from the show notes, but essentially the big problem with 2008, what happened was that 2008, 2009, around that time, everything was going well. Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister, Chidambaram was Finance Minister, and at this point, what was essentially happening was...
And no one was stealing money from public banks, absolutely. So Abhay Singh, he has a comment on this unruly nature of people in India. Before he comments, let me make the point myself. People are unruly because you can get away with not following rules. Because you can bribe a fucking babu or the policeman and get away with it. Law and order is not enforced. Law and order is enforced only when you don't have connections. And law and order is also not enforced because you can get your caste people to come and do halla in front of the police station. And that can happen because casteism doesn't go away unless there is free market capitalism in that area. Free market capitalism can't happen because again the babus are preventing it, or when it does happen, union bazi is going to fuck the country out of that place. Endless cycle. As I told you, they are English-speaking elite of India who believe in people like Amartya Sen and Abhijit Banerjee. I don't think so they do, because they are absolutely in the opposite camp, at least economic vision-wise. 2004-14 was worse. Without accountability of babus and incentivizing good behavior and disincentivizing bad behavior, nothing much is going to change. Yes, and these three are the fucking key points. Now, it does sound a bit trolly for us random people on the YouTube comment section and me as a YouTuber and a college dropout to say that, you see, just these three things could have solved all of India's problems, and those countless economics PhDs could not figure it out. There might be other things at play, but I don't see what the fuck. and they are not bringing up the incentivizing part anyway. So we'll have to stick to our guns here, which is incentivize good behavior and disincentivize bad behavior.
Financial crisis had just happened of 2008, and they were dealing with it really well, and everything was going fine. And you actually worked there at the time, so maybe you can elaborate on that. But then the terrorist attacks on Mumbai happened. The Home Minister Shivraj Patil was incompetent, unable to handle it. Manmohan Singh wanted his best man on the job. That was Chidambaram. That meant the finance ministry was now empty.
अरे
And
भाई ये बाद में बैंडेड, वो टेररिस्ट अटैक हुआ ही क्यों? For that they were culpable anyway.
Manmohan Singh would have stepped into that for the longest time until Chidambaram came back. Except that he had to go in for an operation that January, if I remember. And Sonia Gandhi got Pranab Mukherjee into that post. And Pranab Mukherjee was a disaster. He was a socialist thinker from the Indira 70s.
I think I must do a poll in my community tab. Which Bengali has fucked India's economy harder? Prashant Mahalanobish or Pranab Mukherjee? Comments, show of hands guys, vote here. Who was worse for India?
And everything he thought and knew about economics was completely wrong, and he had a free hand because he had Sonia's backing, and the economy gradually went to hell. A lot of the shit that happened then, like retrospective taxation and so on, were all Pranab's doing, to the point that circa 2013 people realized that this man is really going to take us down, and they got him kicked him upstairs to the presidency. Chidambaram comes back. Chidambaram tries his best for a while. Then 2014 the government changes, and the Jaitley ministry actually shows continuity.
बढ़िया काम किया है, इतना बढ़िया जो रेट्रोस्पेक्टिव टैक्सेशन का आइडिया बनाया है, आहा, इसके लिए आपको इंसेंटिवाइज किया जाता है. आप जाइए प्रेसिडेंसी में, अब आपका सब सैलरी वैलरी तो आपका था ही, वैसे ही भी सब कुछ फ्री ही था, वो सब और थोड़ा ज़्यादा सैलरी लीजिए और थोड़ा फ्री चीज़ें आप भी लीजिए.
And again, you have that same golden continuity where they carry on those policies for a while, but then politics takes over in 2015 onwards, everything goes to hell. Let's not elaborate on that. But this is kind of the summary that I have. And you are actually...
But I want to dig deeper into it. So yes, of course, it's dumb luck. There was a terrorist attack which had enormous consequences for India in precisely the ways that you described.
Yes, and it's just dumb luck that such terrorist attacks don't happen anymore. It's just dumb luck, guys. You see, intelligence had nothing to do with it.
I find that a deeply dissatisfying solution because there will always be good and bad luck. So I have mulled over this period and I will tell a different story. The story I will tell...
after all, he's just from a different generation. I remember Saurav Ganguly saying this. When those Sri Lankan players got shot in Pakistan, Saurav Ganguly said that you can't really avoid these things, Terrorism hai, hoga hi hamesha. थोड़े क्रिकेटर्स गोली खाएंगे, कुछ लोग वैसे कभी कभी मरेंगे स्टेशंस में, ऐसा होते ही रहता है, क्या करे. Before Narendra Modi, no one realized that yes, we can think of a country where terrorist attacks don't happen anymore. You can nub the fuck out of people in their asses and nip the fucking buds.
Tell is that there was low intellectual capacity in the work of the reforms after 1991, so that the fundamental machinery of government was intact. Freedom had not gone up. The laws were still oppressive. In fact, the laws of 2008-9, at the period that we are describing, were more oppressive than the laws of 1991. What was keeping a ship aloft was certain individuals, which to me is an unacceptable and fragile way of building a country. So what we need to do...
Yeah, and the entire time that Pranab Mukherjee was in office, in some form or the other, West Bengal kept declining. क्या बढ़िया leader बनाया है बंगाल ने.
Is to get better laws to enshrine greater levels of freedom into the statutes and build organization designs into government departments and government organizations so that the working of the government is not so vulnerable. As a counterexample, I hold to you the remarkable period of the United States where Donald Trump became president. And you know what? A lot of the parts of the United States government worked as usual. That is institutional quality. That you get an unimaginably bad character as a head of state, but the state has an institutional quality of its own.
So good person, bad person doesn't matter. So mysteriously, it was just dumb luck that the policies of 1991 failed. What was it then? Was it good luck? Was it bad luck? Or was it the fact that Indians are corrupt people in general? Or was it that our system was still dependent upon good, nice people coming to power?
That to me is the essence of what the 91 period failed to do. It was a lack of knowledge around the words freedom, public administration, laws, organization, design, checks and balances, all the stuff that...
I don't want to give credit to this man. I agree with him 99%. But incentive ka kya?
Kelkar and I built into the book, and that would today be widely known in India amongst a new generation of intellectuals, was not known in that period. And so that was more like a sensible, good bunch of people taking the reins of power, operating an old repressive apparatus in better ways. That was not rebuilding the apparatus.
Before we get to our recommendations, I want to cycle back to that value that we spoke of at the start of the episode, freedom.
Yes.
You know, where are we with freedom today? Because we often think that the long arc of history will inevitably take us towards justice, freedom, all of those beautiful things. But I get more and more despondent about that in the current times that we live in.
We should not be despondent in the current times. We should be cautious through our reading of history. Okay, so that's it. It's cold and clear that a great dawn of Deng Xiaoping in 1978 has turned into a horrible period in China today. A great dawn of Russia at the collapse of the USSR has turned into a disgusting period today. The great
हाँ भाई,
flourishing
इन सब में क्या सिमिलैरिटी है? इनमें से कोई भी देश ने जो आपने मेंशन किया अभी इनमें से किसी भी देश ने सिस्टम को ऐसा नहीं बनाया कि हरामी जब आके प्रेसिडेंट या प्राइम मिनिस्टर बनेगा वो देश का गार्ड नहीं मार पाएगा. ऐसा सिस्टम किसी ने नहीं बनाया. इन सब लोगों ने डिपेंड किया, जस्ट लाइक इंडिया टुडे डज, डिपेंड्स ऑन द गुडविल एंड मॉरल्स ऑफ द करंट सिटिंग प्राइम मिनिस्टर, which is something you pointed out USA didn't do.
of freedom in the Weimar Republic turned into Nazi Germany. So
everything beautiful becomes something horrible. Is that
Well,
the lesson? Give
just
me the
the-
opposite lesson.
Well, out of the ashes of post-war Germany and Japan, you could have been despondent that these are disgusting militaristic states. You could have said that the German mind is fundamentally obedient. Okay, so that Germany can never
What the fuck?
achieve democracy
And look
because
what they've
they
done.
will just obey any strong man. You could have said all those things about Germany. You could have said that the Japanese people are imperialistic, militaristic. But look at what beautiful countries have come out of these two. So we should not take things for granted, and we should never lull ourselves to the dangers and the pitfalls. That said, it is our job to be thinkers, to keep talking, to keep thinking, to keep understanding, and the world is a rich and wonderful place, and progress can always happen.
And since StreamYard fucked us over today, I still don't know what the problem is. I'll have to see what happens tomorrow. So we are from Google Meet. I can't do intro and outro music, unfortunately. So thank you for joining the live stream, guys. Good night. It was a very fun conversation, very enlightening, and a brilliant discussion in the comment section. Bye bye, guys. Good night.